no one's really joined online, but maybe that just means everybody else is en route. I don't know. How are you doing, Kate?
So at least one person, I think Diane, sent an email saying she was going to be online.
Okay. Hopefully she'll join it shortly. But why don't we get started? I've got 9:35. So we've got, as always, a full agenda today. Apologies for the flurry of emails over the last 24 hours or so. It's definitely a scramble for our little planning work group now that the time between meetings is 7 days, not 14 days. But we're doing the best we can. I'm just going to remind us of our purpose. It's finding areas of consensus or shared agreement. Report due October 15th. This is the second to last meeting. Next Wednesday is the last meeting. We're beginning to work on the report this week just to begin kind of putting together the key parts that we already know that we can write about. Letter of intent, just reminders here. Review of timeliness, refinements of deadlines, what's needed to shorten timelines, identifying key challenges, opportunities, and so on. Our ground rules, again, you know, I believe everyone comes in here with good intentions and goodwill. We just need to keep that in mind in the conversations. And we're doing the best we can where we can, moving towards next week where we can find things that we can agree upon. And I'll review at the end of this meeting, again, what our ground rules for consensus are going to be. So next week is the last meeting. We extended it from 12:30 to 1:30, so it's a 4-hour meeting, not a 3-hour meeting. So our agenda today, it kind of follows the same format as the last couple of meetings, where we'll have an hour and a half of discussion on categories of public testimony. We'll take a 10-minute break. We'll have a little more than an hour to continue conversations on whatever category we're on. And I'm leaving about 10 minutes at the end to just talk about preparation for next week. Just a review of what we talked about last week. We continued and finished permitting. We had an extensive discussion on public involvement, which included discussion about East County. In preparation for today's meeting, as you should have seen by around 5 o'clock last night, we have put together our best effort, our best faith effort on an initial draft of 17 recommendations that seem to have emerged from all of our conversations over past weeks. So you now have that for your review. We're not going to talk about them today, but we are going to ask you to review them and give feedback on them between now and Friday.
I think some people are having trouble getting in.
That I can't help, but maybe someone from planning can help.
What are they? What's the?
Do I need to somehow let them in from here, or they should get in automatically, right?
Because you're logged in and Kim
Right.
logged in.
I don't. So Tom, can you just let whoever you're in contact with know that we're working on it, see what the problem might be? As you all know and saw last time, there were about 30 additional comments that came in the second half of August. We've now integrated them into the updated spreadsheet, which I believe I sent out first thing yesterday morning. And so we've added them into the categories where we felt like they belonged. And there were a couple cases where they rose, or some of the things rose to the level of a summary bullet at the top of the category. So if we have time, we may go back to a couple of those things. Not sure we will. And so we've developed a process for updating the draft recommendations, which I sent in yesterday's email. I'll review it in more detail at the end of the meeting, but it's essentially, we need all your feedback or potential upgrades of how recommendations are written, the 17 that you saw, and then we're going to have to figure out how to reconcile that. So I'm not looking for people to kind of critique the perfect English, what the perfect English should be. It's like, does it match the spirit of what we're trying to say? Because I don't want to end up like, well, 5 different people said 5 different things about the wording that we should have for recommendation number 12. That, that will cause me many a headache over the weekend. But like, kind of really giving us feedback that will hopefully upgrade however it's written. Christina?
I just wanted to let Tom know, the link is fine, so can you make sure that they're using the link for today?
Okay, so I just got a call also from Diane. She says she has tried 3 times. She can't get in.
I don't know.
I don't know.
I can get in, so I
I don't know. Can you hear us, Diane?
I hear, but I heard that she said that the link is fine. It's not. I've tried 3 times. I just tried the old link too, but I tried the one that was Steve's email from, I think it was yesterday or the day before.
not in Steve's email, go into your
Yeah,
calendar.
it should
to
be
the calendar.
embedded in your team, your calendar, your team's invite from Emily Balmer.
I go to the calendar.
Right. Did they invite?
It was it always comes through a
Yeah,
calendar.
I- from Emily.
I just,
Right, I was able
Yeah.
The one that comes on
Go to
the
Outlook.
calendar.
Yeah.
Outlook.
Okay, because Steve's email said to join, use this link.
No, don't use that. Just use the one you've been using, Saturday weeks.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, thanks.
Apologies if I did that. I don't remember doing that. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of this. There will be an opportunity if you feel like the 17 we came up with does not embrace all of the things where we seem to have shared agreement over the last couple of months. We'll have an opportunity to submit those, but we'll need them by Friday midday because we got to turn them around. We don't have time to meet until Monday, but we got to turn them around to you on Tuesday. So it's a very, very tight timeline. Is that it? All right. So just to review, so far, left-hand column, you see the 10 or so categories we've already discussed. The order of the next discussions today, I'm hoping we can at least get to these 3: agency coordination / lead agency, amendments administrative, and people's counsel. We will have a general counsel for Montgomery County Planning here 11-ish to help inform that discussion. If we're really expeditious today, we have 2 others kind of in the hold of what we can address, and that's traffic and environment. If you really want to discuss those, you might, try and help me push some of these conversations along. And then honestly, if we had more meetings, more time, the month of October, we'd address all these, but we don't. So, for this work group process, for the timeline that we're in, we're just not going to be able to address those. It will show up in the report, the public testimony, but we don't have the time to address it. So again, this is just kind of summarizing where we are right now. Consensus, this is what we talked about last time. I think we agreed to that. Ultimately, we're talking about if all 18 members, formal members, show up either online or in person, that would be 18. The threshold for something getting approved as a recommendation is 66.6%, rounded up to 67. And each working group member will have the opportunity to vote on each recommendation, however many we end up with.
So how many votes is that out of 18
For
for the 66%?
consensus,
Yeah.
12.
Well, okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
We have 17. It's not a great number. We'll have to do the math. And like we've done the last few meetings, we're going to be starting with a category. We're going to primarily be focused on the summary bullets at the top of that category. And if you believe there's more to that category than that, please dig into the spreadsheet while we're here and bring those things up. Otherwise, I'm going to be focusing the conversation on those summary bullets. And so, yeah, here's what here's the 3 I'm really hoping we can get through with your help. The lead agency, the amendments, the people's counsel. We talked internally that if there is time, a little bit of time, we might go back to a couple of things that came up in the last rounds of public comment that pertain to previous categories we've already addressed. again, I don't think we're gonna have a whole lot of time, but that's one thing we could do. And if we had even more time, traffic and environment. Gary, it's strange to have you on this side of the table.
I think I start here
See what happens when you show up
I
a
was
little
here the
late?
first meeting, but anyway. I'll come.
All right, so that's what I'm gonna show at the end. So, any comment or question before we dig into the content here?
Steve?
Yeah.
Just a question. Did you want to talk about the recommendations? Or a little bit about that list and how people can still add recommendations after today, or?
Sure, I can. I mean, I said a little bit about that, but so just very briefly, we, as a result of all the conversations we've had so far, looking back at the notes, re-listening to the team's meetings, we've come up with and tracked 17 potential recommendations, which you saw last night at 5 o'clock. We did the best we could, not on, my favorite one is this, so it goes on the list. It's like, do we feel like this is where the group landed? So we came up with 17. You may agree or disagree with whether they all belong on that list. There may be things missing. So we're not going to be talking about these recommendations today. That's for next week. The deadline is Friday noon. If you have comments or concerns about the recommendations or how they're framed on that list of 17, if you think essential things are missing as a result of the conversations we had that don't show up on the list, please submit them to us by the 17th, or just kind of broadly, if we've discussed things and it seemed like the group was at a place of, that makes sense. Again, that's kind of criteria for submitting them to us, but we got to have them by Friday at noon so we can begin to contend with and just, we're going to come up with recommendations today that we got to kind of massage and figure out. So I'm expecting the final list we're going to have is going to be in excess of 20, maybe closer to 30. So we'll have to see. And then, we have to realize then whatever that list is, we're trying to deal with every single one of them next Wednesday.
So,
And Kate's giving me kind of can we really do that or not? I don't know.
So if I could just say, and I didn't see your email from a little bit after 7 a.m. this morning till recently, but I do think we need to be, I still have concern about the idea that there's a perception of that there's a consensus based on a perception of whether people, whether something came up. I think we can't determine a consensus by people's silence during discussion or nodding of heads, because I think that we didn't make that clear at the beginning, that at the beginning of this whole process 3 months ago, that if you didn't speak up during the discussion, then that you weren't going to have the opportunity to have a recommendation on that issue later. So I have concern about that. I expressed it yesterday in our smaller meeting, and I do have a concern about that. So just wanted to put that on the table.
But just to be clear, I mean, what I'm saying is that by Friday noon, if you think there's something that belongs on that list that we've talked about, then submit it in.
And that I agree with, yes. If something we've talked about and you think it's not on the list and it should be, then people can submit it.
And if you think something of that list of 17 doesn't belong there because you feel like, well, no, there really wasn't, you can give us that feedback. That's what this whole 3-day period is for feedback, comments, potential edits, and potential new things.
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you.
All right. I want to welcome Delegate Lopez. We haven't seen you in a couple of weeks.
Sure, yeah.
Good to see you.
Delegate Floyd has done a great job of standing in and reporting back everything to me. And I know I'll make things fast because I know there's a lot to do today, but just to share with you, I've had a lot of conversations with people in the public sector and private sector about this work group. And the only feedback I have received is just just overwhelmingly positive, surprised that things have worked out so positively. I think knowing that this is an unconventional way to solve a longstanding and stubborn set of perceived problems. And so I just want to let you know that people are really appreciating the work that you're doing. I know these meetings are difficult and long and can be a little bit thorny. And you know, I don't think that you're exposed to all the public praise that you're receiving, but it's being very well received. And I just want you to keep your spirits up as we go through these final weeks, because it's making a difference.
That is a great way to start this meeting, though. I love it.
All right, thank you. All right, so let's dig into lead agency. One thing that I reflected on this morning was that it actually doesn't show up on the recommendations, was there was agreement, at least by the agencies that would likely be involved with this, that there would be a follow-on process interagency around evaluating and revising the lead agency document, right? So that is something that there was agreement on. So perhaps that ends up on the list. But let's see where today's conversation takes us. And I'm going to go through these one by one. All right. So the first, actually, so we talked about this last week. So intake has already been discussed in intake. So I'm going to go to the second bullet, which is consolidate or limit periods for agency comment. So maybe it would help me to understand from those who are kind of in the know on what those periods are currently, you know, what this comment may actually, or this bullet may be referring to. How does this impact lead agency?
Don't know.
Is it not clear?
I don't know if it's clear that it impacts lead agency. I think it impacts the coordination between the agencies. And I think the way we understand the timeframes are, you know, there's a submittal, it gets posted in e-plans. Within 2 weeks, we're supposed to have our draft letter to everybody and have a meeting. I think certainly the draft letter appears to get done within that time frame. There are often not consensus at the time of that between the applicant and the various agencies involved. But that typically gets resolved through trying to achieve consensus in the time after the DRC. I'm not sure I understand the comment.
Yeah. So Pam, I hate to put you on the spot, but do you remember kind of the range of comments that this is what specifically may have been referred to here?
If I remember correctly, and I don't think I have my file with me, unfortunately. I think it came from maybe even just one comment, possibly only two, but this idea that there should be some limitation to, you know, the amount of time that intake takes. And I know when we had the conversation about intake, we talked about the fact that if you limit that time and you then accept things that aren't really fully ready for review, what you're going to end up with is something that's going to take longer through the DRC process because you have to go back and get more information. But it appeared again under this, so I didn't want to neglect putting the comment down.
The agency, it's talking about agency though, which intake doesn't have agency comments. Maybe we can pull it up.
Yeah, maybe it was then from the DRC
Yeah, it's
review.
probably about DRC. Maybe we should move on to the next one.
Yeah,
So we can
I'll
move on to
see
the
if I
next
can
one and
find
circle
it.
back to this.
Sorry about that.
Establish an efficient process for resolving conflicting agency comments and directives.
So I would say the process does exist right now. I don't know that it is being followed by all parties who signed on to it. I think that's the first step, is recommitting to conflict resolution process. We can do that right now because that is in effect. It's signed by the agencies right now. There should be no, it is the way we're supposed to be doing business.
And I think we follow it more than people think, on a very regular basis.
And I don't know if that is getting at, this one and the next one is getting at what you talked about when you introduced this topic, is we all sat here and agreed that, we ought to dust off the lead agency agreement. So I see this as kind of a two-step process. One, live by what we all agreed to in 2010, and two, pick it up, look at it. There's been regulation changes, there's been law changes, there's been reorganizations of departments and stuff like that, and dust it off and revisit it. I think that's the two-step process for this one.
One of the things that I think I'm not clear about, so I know the lead agency memo, I forget how many pages is, maybe a couple dozen. And then on the very last page was a truncated kind of conflict resolution flow chart, so to speak. We finally, I think, got the full chart. Now, does that chart represent the kind of the full way that you go about resolving conflict, or is there some separate document? Because I never saw a separate document.
There are steps identified in the MOU for addressing agency conflicts, both at DRC before plan approval and subsequent to plan approval. So there are steps there, and actually,
That's in the lead agency memo, Alan?
yes.
Okay.
And the last item in the memo notes that the work group, whoever the work group was at the time, was supposed to provide an annual report to the county council. First of which is due after the meeting to be held on paragraph 14 herein, highlighting examples of lead agency decision and steps were taken to resolve issues that arose, so on and so forth. I don't even think the first one ever went out to the council.
Well, I don't think that MOU was signed by everyone either.
You don't think what, Robert?
That MOU was not signed by all the parties either.
The only one I don't have on this version is WSSC.
That's correct.
WSSC is. But there is a document for conflict resolution, correct?
I think that it's the flow chart that's all I found.
Right.
Well, the whole document is entitled Memorandum of Understanding Implementing the April 10th Report of the Conflict Resolution Workgroup. So it's agreed to by, yes, by TEP, by HCA, by planning, Parkland, the chair, and by the CAO. EPCO signed it, and WSSC did not.
It's not here.
So I guess one of the issues that came up was the uncertainty of the process right now. Though it seems like the document lays it out fairly clearly. But my understanding, what can happen is that there end up being conditions that would affect what conditions on the document that's going to go to the planning board that would impinge on the right-of-way or the DOT authority. And to have conditions where, to have it appear to the planning board that they can change that or add a condition that's going to affect the right-of-way does create some uncertainty, because the idea from the MOU is that there's a clear distinction that where DOT is the lead agency, then that decision gets deferred to. So I think that instance would create uncertainty and really doesn't conform to what the lead agency document says, because it appears that this should go, if you get to the end and there's no agreement, then ultimately the DOT position is what should be accepted. So, I mean, that appears to be what the document says. So I think that's an issue where that creates uncertainty. And if the planning board does accept that condition, then it creates an issue. It can create an issue for the right of way. So I think it would create more certainty if that weren't the case. If there isn't an agreement, if it doesn't get worked out, then it goes to the planning board with the DOT position. I think that would be what it looks like should happen here. But at least from what I understand from DOT, it's not always the case. So that's I think the issue is following this document would resolve that issue and provide that certainty. And the planning board would get the report saying that, here's the DOT position, and they could say why, they could say whatever, but that would be the ultimate position on that. So I don't know if that creates new problems, but it seems to be what the document would infer. So.
Well,
And that's
I would push back a little bit, Tom, because we have the lead on some of these items where DOT does not, like dedications of right of way. And so I think that the board does have the authority to make some of those decisions. And in many cases, if there's a disagreement between DOT or DPS on something that's been presented as part of a review, that's discussed with the agencies. And if it's elevated and needs to be elevated, which a lot of times it is, then we do follow that MOU. And there's a lot of cases where we've done that. And it's presented to the board where if we don't agree with, and I would say they're not conditions from DOT, they're actually recommendations. The conditions come from the board and from our, based on the reports that come in. So if there's a disagreement as to one of the items that is a recommendation from DOT, that's actually discussed with the board. And we have many examples where that's discussed with the board. And I can say it doesn't happen that often where they've come in with a recommendation and we've actually said, we don't agree with it for these reasons, and the board weighs that decision as part of a.
Robert, when you say we don't agree, who's the we there?
Well, the we would be if the board doesn't agree with it, but we could be if staff is having this communication and we don't agree with it based on the application that's come in, it's elevated, whether it's to the chief, whether it's to the director. It does get elevated and there's a discussion, and sometimes there's just not an agreement. And in some cases where the lead does have the authority, that decision's being made at the board.
So I would say that does not comport with the flow chart here, because if there is a disagreement that the DOT is sticking to its guns on those things, because there's a regulatory or a code issue. It says right here, does it contradict any legal or regulatory requirements? And, then, goes on, can a compromise be reached? And if it can't be, it says the plan is not approvable. Applicant may choose to redesign or withdraw the plan. And I can't recall getting to that point of the process. I think what happens in practice is the board will say, we adopt the DOT letter, but we will strike condition number 11 or 12. And that's where the lead agency, where the conflict resolution process is not being followed.
I know Diane wants to get in here. Diane?
Thank you. So I also think it may be helpful to draw some distinctions between if something has to do with the dedication of a road, that's one of the findings that the board has to make, that if it's a master planned road, the conformity to the master plan, and so the planning board certainly would have the authority on that one to say, yeah, this road needs to be dedicated, or this additional lane needs to be dedicated to get to the full master plan width of the road. But where I have seen a lot of the conflicts arising has to do with what's happening within the public right of way. What are the conditions that wanting to have, whether it's furnishings or wanting to have projections, wanting to have things that might be obstructions to vision within the public right of way. And I was wondering if Tim could maybe talk about if that's where the areas of conflict are coming, or am I missing something?
Yeah, I mean, no, I mean, and this, it's funny, this is nothing new, because I'm looking here at some of the examples from 2009, and they're all listed here again. Open section versus closed section road, deviation from DOT's approved design standards, pavement widths, site distances, traffic calming measures, which, things that are operational, and that there are, in fact, county code and county regulations that govern that have to be complied with. To my, angst sometimes, because I think some of these things, our regulations hamstring us a little too much, but they are the regulations. Well, I'd love to have more latitude for some of these things, but so off-street
a couple of
loading spaces. I mean, this is all.
Can I just add something though to that too? Thank you. That's a really, and that refreshes my recollection a little bit more too. But the other concern is that the county ends up with a lot of the liability and the responsibility for dealing with public rights of way that don't end up being in accordance with standards. And the standards they're developed by sound engineering, and there's something called design liability. So when there's a problem, and there are problems at times, when there's a problem, the county has to deal with the problem that results from it, and the community, which is what's been discussed so much in with respect to the Bethesda community. And I dare say Silver Spring community would probably have similar comments. But that's one issue. And then the cost of having to deal with the ongoing problems. If there's retrofitting that is required or anything like that, it comes out of these are unfunded mandates. So that's why I do think that when this is being discussed, it's important for people to understand that there are sound reasons why it makes sense for DOT to have the final say on some of these issues.
But that's actually not, I get that, but that's not how the MOU is written. We are actually the lead, the planning department is the lead on these issues that are in this memo. And DOT is like a sub of that. So it says that they can have like a say in some things, and that there's a process that goes through when that happens, when there's a disagreement. But then ultimately it rises to the level.
There are things where, for example, the lead agency, and we've reorganized a little bit, but Fire and Rescue Services is the lead agency. There are things where DOT is the lead agency.
I mean, like road design, I'm just trying to look at this memo, which is, from 2010. And I think we all agree that we need to look at it again.
Here's the problem. Everybody agrees that the memo needs to be revisited. And the other piece of the problem is that the reason we're even talking about this is that there can be disconnects between what is being approved and what is permittable. That's what got us to this table. And so that has to be part of what frames this discussion, Christina. Even if it says it in the MOU, it doesn't mean that it's not causing a problem someplace else, because, and again, I keep coming back to the permit realm, which is ministerial, that if it doesn't meet the standards, it has an approvability problem.
I hear what you're saying, Diane. What I'm just saying is I think the lead agency memo is being followed, but it was drafted in 2010. I think what all of us are saying here is we need to update it. And so I think the recommendation that's likely to come out of this, because we can't update it right here. We need the experts in the room, and we don't have the time. So I think the recommendation that would be coming out of here, at least what I would propose, is that we, put on there that we are going to convene a lead agency MOU, I hate to call it a word. Team, task force, whatever it's going to be, to look at it.
So I would just add to that, what I started my discussion with was make sure we're all following it now, recommit to it, because we all signed it, WSSC notwithstanding. Let's live up to it now.
And I believe in many cases we are, Tim. There may be a few areas where that's deviated, but we do follow it. And for those of us that participate in that process on a very regular basis, we do follow it.
Okay, I want to get Sharice in here and then Tom.
I'm gonna keep reflecting back to like the details of the comments and who they came from. And I'm in agreement with what everybody said. We're revisiting it, but then also maybe if it's not already, making it more public facing. This MBIA people, they're all over.
Maryland Business Industry Association.
Okay, so this comment came from them. So it's probably something specific that has happened with them. But I think as part of the work that comes out of this group, we talked about making things more forward facing or available to show that we've addressed it. So I would just add, in addition to whatever task force comes out to readdress lead agency, just putting it out there also that, you know, to your point, to the best of our knowledge, you know, we're following this, but we're recommitting to updating it to today's and future standards.
I think we really, you know, we spent a lot of time on these issues. And actually, one of the things, the very last thing in that list that Tim mentioned from 2009 was off-street loading adequacy. And that's an issue that we had earlier discussions on, and Amanda brought up some problems in Bethesda. So 2009, that was already something that this MOU was supposed to address, and designated DOT as the lead on those issues. And one of the things that I think we need to do is more than just say that this ought to be updated and studied. I think we really have the opportunity to give a few specifics about how it ought to be updated. And one of the things I think that maybe needs to be clarified, because this is clearly still an issue. And just about 2 or 3 years ago, I think planning issued a request for consultants. And in the document that makes the request, it shows pictures of Bethesda that show people walking in the street to go around trucks that are extending across the sidewalk, trucks in the right of way parked. And it's something that we heard earlier in our earlier discussions, that this is an issue that DOT presented. And that consultant study, I think, was delayed, and quite rightly, there was a lot going on with the pandemic after 2019. I totally understand it, but this is 2009. This is an issue. It was an issue that was raised. Robert, you and I had a discussion about one project, and you said, "Wow, that's like more than 5 years ago." But it was an issue then, and it's still an issue now. It hasn't been addressed. It seemed like something that should have been dealt with by the existing memo if everyone was following it. And maybe we need a clarification that it's not just that planning has complete control over the site and DOT has complete control over the right-of-way. There's an inference, I think, here with that adequate off-street loading, that it really, if it's going to affect the right-of-way, that has to be something that's clarified. This is a problem that affects the right-of-way. It affects safety in Bethesda. And every time another loading dock is approved that's short or extent is going to force trucks out onto the street, it's a new safety issue. And I think that we really need to clarify that. And I think it has to be part of the whatever our recommendation is going to be.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate how much effort people are thinking about all of this. My concern right this minute is that we still have a lot to go through. And I think that the more time we spend on a detail about something that a task force that we are all seemingly, I know everybody's saying a word here, but people seem to be, because they're not objecting, in agreement that that's a good recommendation to come out of this, a task force to revisit the MOU, the lead agency. How do we make it better? How does it work better? I just wish we weren't spending the time to talk about details that go into that. I mean, that's just my own personal opinion. We have a lot to cover here, and I'm not saying that can't happen. But it seems to me those are the detailed discussions that occurred with that task force when that gets formed. If this group is going to continue to do some work today.
Here's what I would say, because, we've talked about lead agency multiple times, going back to July at least, right? I'm wondering if we can spend our time, so there are other issues in this spreadsheet, overlapping roles and authority, traffic mitigation agreements, et cetera. I'm wondering, so I'm hoping the next set of comments can address those, but what I'm also thinking, what I'm hearing from Tom is there specific guidance that we want to make sure when that lead agency, interagency work group, not work group, what do we call it, task force happens, that they're especially paying attention to X, Y, and Z. So.
Can I say something now, please? Thank you. Thank you. That's exactly the point, Steve, that I think that what we should take out of this conversation, and I love the word task force. Yes, there's going to be a task force. Yes, it's going to be revisited, but what are some of the things to look at as you're revisiting it? And Tom has gone through a litany of things, and I have mentioned before, one of the things that would be really, really helpful to inform this is to pull the agency comments on these different projects, because I know that there were agency comments back for the 8 years that I was at DPS, where agency comments, and all the years before that too, by the way, representing the county in various ways, where agency comments would be made and they would be ignored. And communities have lived with the problems as a result of that, whether it is Clarksburg, whether it is Bethesda, whether it is Silver Spring. And, we'll see, hopefully East County we've got, there's going to be a lot more development happening, I think, in the context that following up on the pending master plan amendment or master plan update. So I think it's really important that as this task force does its work, it looks at the comments that the agencies are making and where they're not being followed and what the result is that the community lives with and the county has to fix.
So one of the things that I heard Tim say is, and again, I don't have the memo in front of me, I can pull it up, but that a lot of the issues that the MOU was put together in order to address are still issues that recur. Is that?
Well, it sounds like what I suspect happened is it all worked fine for a while, and then some things deteriorate over time, and that's why, a part of my recommend, but I have, the kind of the notes and all the stuff that went in, people from different DHCA, from the different folks saying, hey, these are the concerns that we're having. And it's the same stuff we've been discussing here. So I think, we recognize there's going to be disagreements, right? People who care about and have responsibility under the code are going to, they're going to advocate for what their professional judgment they see as best. We have a process. I hear Robert saying we're following it. So great. So it should be a very easy thing for us, this work group, to say, yes, continue to follow it until, we get the outcome of this work group and update it. Because, there's always room for improvement. I think that's, continuous improvement is something that we've all agreed we can get behind as well, I think.
I'd just like to add one thing, is when this does get updated, if there is direction on things like loading docs and things like that and other documentation, update that documentation. Don't put it here, because what I'm finding is sometimes we get direction from different agencies and it's like, refer to this document. Another agency's like, no, refer to this document. And they may align, they may not align, but as someone who has to follow the direction, it would be helpful if there's just one centralized location for the direction to be. So like the lead agency document is, who is the person in charge, but maybe the examples given are maybe those are elsewhere, and that also should be looked at too. If there's specific problems, then let's look at it in the source location.
I think that's a good point, especially because, the code actually says in all the codes actually say many times, like this is, you know, the planning board can make the decision on this if there's a disagreement or, you know, so it's not just, we have to make sure all these things are in line.
Is Gary, then Tom?
Yeah, just to add to that, I know Diane made the comment about how comments are ignored. I'll disagree with that because park planning, DPS, DOT, they don't let us ignore comments. But to Kate's point, there may be two different standards or two different, situations. And when stuff goes to planning board, one of those is approved, but then someone comes back later and says, you didn't do it my way. So if we can reconcile that a little bit, that'd be very helpful and give folks surety as they go forward. So.
Yeah.
So
The thing I was gonna.
Tom, then Diane.
Okay, yeah, the thing I was, that Kate's comments and Gary's reminded me of another issue, and that is, you know, the functional master plans, they could create problems with the existing regional master plans and also with this lead agency document and, you know, issues having to do with the right of way. And so I think that that's an issue where for the pedestrian master plan and a bicycle master plan, you know, where if there's different guidance from these different documents, I think that is a thing that, to go back to Kate's point, that's something that we ought to recommend to the work group that, or the, whatever we're going to call it, the future group, that they ought to address those issues because, you know, the pedestrian master plan is still something that's, you know, in process. And
When it gets adopted, a functional master plan amends the master plans that are already on the ground. And so it should be, but it could be part of this clarity that the most recently adopted plan is the one that should be followed, not the one.
And does it override the lead agency document or the, you know, the right of way authority with DOT? That would be an issue.
I don't think it does, because I mean, both the planning board has authority to adopt the master plan, but there are also other components of the code that, you know, are, you know, other agencies are stewards of, and there's the building code, for example. A master plan can't, you know, modify a life safety requirement. And I would note that both, you know, the general counsel for the planning board and the county attorney on this agreement signed off onto sufficient legal sufficiency. So, I mean, when we first did this, you know, people recognized that what we were saying in here didn't contravene any legal requirement within the county state law.
So one last comment, and this has to do with speed and certainty, but that is there a way to speed up the process of elevating this to the point of the decision maker, the person who is going to be the final authority on various conflicts? So, where it goes not just, you know, as discussions between whoever's the analyst on the DOT side and the planning side and WSSC, that it would be elevated to, you know, a higher level more quickly to resolve issues, just to speed things up in the process. Can that work group look at that issue as well?
Diane, do you still have your hand up? Or?
I do. Thank you. So to Kate's point, when we did the cross-agency streamlining, we actually identified things that needed to be updated as part of the process. And so as you're looking at the lead agency, I think a good takeaway would be, for example, there were road cross sections, there was stormwater management, the ESD design standards. So there, in addition to, and that would be the things that the developers and the engineers would want to be looking at. So as you're, I think it would be very helpful for the development community to help pinpoint where it is that they are looking, and for the agency, so that those are the places that you're also doing the concomitant updates, if you will. Those are things that are published. There was a whole book that DOT had been working on. They had not published where to update the cross sections for different roads. That I think got completed. And I think those are the kinds of things that would be helpful to the development community.
Okay. So, so these are all helpful. I mean, I'm trying to capture as many notes as I can about the kinds of things that we need to make sure that this group addresses. one of the things that I see here as the specific summary bullet is around overlapping roles and authority between departments. I don't know if there's anything more to be said about that. Obviously, in this task force process, will need to be clearer if there are actually overlapping or conflicting roles and authority, that those get straightened out. Is there anything more to say about that beyond that? Of course, that's just kind of an obvious thing that we need to do as a part of the task force.
There's 42 S's and 1 L on each one of these lines in this chart. S being a supporting agency, L being a lead agency.
Okay.
So I think that's probably inherent in the process that we're talking about, recommending. To Tom's question, is there a way to speed up the process of decision maker? I think maybe that's something we can take an immediate action item on. I mean, we get to DRC, we get to the meeting, discuss the comments. You know, we give ourselves a week or 2 weeks to resolve any, you know, disagreement between agencies, and then we invoke, you know, the dispute resolution. I mean, that seems to me, I think DOT would be up for something like that if you guys are.
Well, I think the timeline's already there. So 90 or 120 days. And if it goes beyond that, then you know, that's where, you know, depending on which agencies are having any kind of disagreement, then, you know, I think it's spelled out in the MOU too. I think there is something in there that talks about timing. And I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me, but I think there is something in there about timing.
But I think to me, the point here is not so much what's in the document now, is to revisit it in the document and decide, is that what makes sense or does it need to be revised, right? So, but to Tom's point, part of the goal here would be, are there places here, in addition to making things clearer, conflicts get resolved kind of more straightforwardly, is there a way to speed up the process as well? Sheree?
It's just a suggestion that I've heard from some lawyers and some developers that they think elevating these things sometimes could speed up that process. So we need to get, you know, under the 90 or 120 days, just in terms of that kind of.
I just skimmed through it. There is no time frame on resolving the difference. In fact,
I think there might be some timeline in regard to how long, 3 weeks or 4 weeks. It's not in that chart. There was a flow chart attached. So the conflict resolution.
All right, so I mean,
so that can be part of what we look at as an update to the lead agency, is establishing a time where.
As long as we're not creating a whole new timeline.
No, I think what we would want to do is build it to within the regulatory timeframes that are established. And you got to agree.
3 weeks.
3 weeks. So you got to.
It's in there.
It's in there.
Thank you.
all right, I want to make sure Sharice gets it. Sharice?
I just wanted to help too with noting that the last bullet can also be wrapped into this conversation, implement and enforce lead agency role in conflicts post-approval. I mean, we can like say, unless anybody objects to that, that's a part of this update and immediate review process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's important because to make sure, you know, once the decision is made through this process, that things aren't changed then at permitting.
Correct.
Because that will cause problems too. So I think we could lump that all in.
Okay.
Yeah, so, but again, permitting, I mean, they've got specific standards, building standards that they've got to comply with. So I didn't quite.
But Tom, they review it as part of the DRC process.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Right.
if they're
So
reviewing it,
so it should be already approved.
Yeah, and let me add to that. So pick on complete streets right now, which is relatively new. We need obviously DOT, but DPS for stormwater, park and planning, sidewalks, bike, trees, all that stuff for within a road. And there's some options. There's a menu for options, like stormwater is a good one. But at DRC, and then as the plan goes forward, that gets approved. But then post-approval, when we go to permitting, there's still that menu. So sometimes the reviewers say, oh, did you consider this option, or this option would be better? And that's where if we can reinforce that, Yeah, we already talked about that. It got vetted through all the agencies. We're going forward this way.
You're talking reviewer with park and planning or DPS?
DPS. So, but again, we still have that menu of options, but those options were already reviewed, months ago. So that's.
So for us, the issue is site plan is approved. By the way, we enforce the site plan, but also when they come to obtain the right-of-way permit, there is a conflict that what they show in the right-of-way, it's not the same as what's shown on the.
Well, ideally, it
site
should
plan.
be what's on
It
the
shouldn't
site
be,
plan,
right.
and
And
that's
that's when-
resolved with all the groups already.
Exactly, that's when really the conflict.
So that's the
which is
post-approval issue,
you
yeah.
know, That's the whole.
And Gary, you said that's
In
at the
instance.
stage of site plan?
No, that's where, when you go to permit.
A permit.
And that's where Hassan's saying, which sometimes it does change, or the county has a comment, you're doing stormwater one way, can you look at it this other way, which are both, to Kate's comment before, they're both viable or permittable per the ordinances, but it's just a little bit different as you go forward, and then that change or that discussion takes time.
So ideally, you want what comes out of park and planning, that's something everybody agreed to, right? The less that got certified, so when they come, there is no conflict.
Right.
So that's a smooth thing, because you're not delayed at park and planning, then you're delayed at DPS. That's what we think we can.
Try and figure out a way, because I think blessing and the curse of complete streets is its flexibility. It gives you flexibility to solve context-sensitive problems, but at the expense maybe of it must be this way. But it is the law of the land.
Well, and that's just the right of way, which planning board approves, obviously the county, in the DOT letter confirms that, but master plan may say it's a 70-foot right of way. Want to go through complete streets to incorporate the wider sidewalk or stormwater, maybe 72 feet. And then we go to DPS, we, change maybe one thing, now all of a sudden the right of way is 73 feet. Oh, you gotta go back to the planning board to adjust that. And it's a matter of, inches or feet, but it's a bureaucracy that takes a lot of time. And that's, if we can lock that in or simplify that, that'd be helpful.
So did I hear you say, Hassan, that we can just kind of take that off the table, that there might be an adjustment of the inches or feet that Gary's talking about as an example?
I think that's for, again, for
the lead agency, the conversation.
Here for lead agency, that we'll get in the weeds when we can,
Got it.
try and hit the
Okay.
other things today, so.
The last thing I want to make sure that we address in this is the traffic mitigation agreements. So I don't know if anyone can edify us or me on what we're talking about here, how that plays into lead agency. And I'm assuming that this may be an issue that we want to make sure it gets addressed in this.
I don't think it's a lead agency issue because DOT it's all within their purview. I think that underneath the county code, the developer comes in with a certain square footage of building. They're required to have a certain level of TDM plan. I think TMAG is probably the old version. It's not the current version. And so, they negotiate. I think this is probably saying, developers would like a streamlined process of getting to that agreement because they come in with a requirement to have the agreement that comes underneath the county code. And there are regulations that are forthcoming that have been published and been under review and need to get transmitted to the county council that we're pushing real hard to get finally, the law was updated and the accompanying regulation update is flagged. But that should, streamline that process. But I think it's a fair critique in that it takes too long to get these agreements.
And I think too, the hard part with those agreements is there are dependencies. So you can't get building permits or you can't do other things until that agreement is approved. And so that makes it a little more sensitive to us.
So this is not a lead agency issue, but it is a
It's
DR
developer
issue.
and DOT and getting to negotiate the the code and the regulations specify a menu of choices that the developer can select. And sometimes there'll be a land use that it's based off of the zone that you're in also, right? Whether you're red, orange, or yellow, or not required for green. And if you're in a red zone with a use that isn't going to generate a lot of commuter traffic, a lot of times a developer won't want to have a lower level of plan approved, whether it's level 1, level 2, level 3. There's varying degrees of commitments on the part of the developer. And there needs to be a rational method, I think, to justify those requests, because I think that's highly subjective and is probably a source of a lot of discussion between developers and DOT is what is the appropriate level underneath the code when you have, like a classic example is you're bringing in a senior center that has a lot of residents but relatively few workers. And if it's in a red policy area, that's going to, based off the square footage, is going to say you need this very detailed, complex TDM plan. And what the developer's saying, yeah, but that's to mitigate the commute trips, and I don't have a lot of commute trips based off of my unit. So
what is there a recommendation that we can
I
consider?
have the original comment if it helps.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, yes.
So the original comment was from Miles and Stockbridge, and it said, examine the process for traffic mitigation agreements and the traffic demand management plans, such as whether MNC PPC needs to be a signatory on the agreements and amendments. And then second, strategies to improve the processing time with DOT. So I agree that second piece probably is a DOT, not lead agency issue. But I think the reason it got dropped under lead agency was the question was whether planning needs to be a signatory on the agreements.
So my understanding is we don't have TMAGs anymore, and TDMs just go to DOT. So
So it might be that comment.
We don't have,
then.
yeah.
yeah, I don't think we should add a step to the process.
Yeah. Right. So that helps. So we can just cross that one off. We're not doing it anymore.
All right, so.
I don't think you guys want to mess with
for the
it.
clarification, they do.
Thank you. I was like, before we get too far.
Right, yes.
I just think with that, there's a lot of unclarity with the TDMs. Like, for example, I just had a project go through
What is a TDM?
traffic demand management. Is that what it is? TDI just.
Okay, all right.
So I just had a plan get approved, a TDM get approved in the last 2 months. And there's some question about it. And it was a mixed plan. It was some apartments, some multifamily, and some fee simple. And so there's a question because the way it was approved, well, was the fee simple part of it? Was it not? And then how do you administer that? If you have an HOA and things like that, there's a lot of complexity in that. And a lot of, there just was a lot of uncertainty and complexity. So anything we could do, I think back to Tim's point, to make it clearer and easier for the applicant, that would be great. Because even getting it in the door, there was a big work effort on our end, trying to figure out what to include, what was included, how to include it. And so that just some clarification and some clear direction would be helpful. And I know they're new, so I'm not, but it just kind of massage it, I think would be helpful.
You're not getting an argument from me. I think it's a very fair comment. It's something that.
We got approved, but it was a little nerve wracking in the process.
Okay.
So this is just, would this be a recommendation to DOT to clarify the process and the standards?
I mean, to me, this seems like the level, it's something that would be included on our list. But each recommendation is going to refer to who's taking the lead on, implementing the recommendation. So, yeah. Is there anything, so I hear what you're saying, Kate, in terms of what developers need. Is there anything more that needs to be recommended here around just getting to agreements quicker? Or is the main thing just kind of guidance and clarity up front?
Yes, because of the fact that there are things in the back that are held up, plats, permits, other approvals that are held up until this gets approved. So then, and it may be a timeline. Did you say timeline?
Curious. Go out on all of them here. But, I mean, I don't want to give up the leverage to make things happen. But can we tie it to something different? Really, you need to have it in place so that when the people start commuting, that's when the agreement needs to be up and running I mean, some of it does affect the building design, because one of the things in all of these agreements is a display for commuter information, and that's usually a digital display, and then there's, content that DOT provides for that display. So to the degree that's usually not, I think you could plan for that, and that's not going to change your electrical permit.
So Tim, real quick, I think, I was just asking Patrick, we used to condition the timing of the TMAG, and when it went to TDM, I don't think we did that anymore because it's in your letter. So I think if there's a change, I think you could do that internally. And if you want to tie it to a different timeline or milestone, then I think you have that ability to do so.
And then the recommendation could be, if I proffer something, just DOT to work with DPS on what an appropriate trigger is for the completion of the, it could be
agreement.
For the agreement. It could be the last building permit. I mean, that's, or, when the people.
Use and occupancy.
I mean,
Yeah.
that would be the like.
Can tie it to you.
We'd be happy to
Not a
work
lot
with the
of
development
time.
community on
You
what
can't
makes sense there.
But right now it's all when you want to obtain your building permit.
Yes.
That's the
If you
issue.
push it off, you know, that would help. Right?
Well, that would be if that's what's the
Hold on.
kind of
I mean, we
consensus.
could tie it to use and occupancy.
No, that's
Tied
fine.
to what?
Use and occupancy.
But what I'm saying is right now is that the building permit, which really delays the construction. So it would help to.
And if
When
it's
you guys review permits, could you review for something as specific as like, or do you review for something as specific as like the monitors in the common areas or no?
What do you
Like
monitor?
for like traffic, like the monitors that has the DOT like live stream
If
display?
we're providing the information on the site plan, yes.
But if in the lobby, there's a display saying the next bus is in 20 minutes, that's not really
That's not-
specific within the building or
That's
the
not within the building
permit, so that could be
Okay.
UNO. So, yeah.
So why don't we say explore options to condition TDM agreements being completed by, use and occupancy rather than building.
Then you have to see, does it require a change to chapter 42 or wherever the TMAG language is, or the TMAG?
Possibly.
is? Yeah, I'm just saying that would happen.
Well, I'm sorry, Sam, I missed that.
Might
There's
require a bill.
requirements under chapter 42 about how the transportation demand management plan works or is set up, or the regs. When you talked about that, I asked Jason said 42. So just have to see whether that's very specific. It may be not. I haven't read it. That's all.
So I feel like we've gotten a lot of guidance that doesn't necessarily need to be folded into a specific recommendation, but some of it may be folded into there. Otherwise, I think we'll have the longest recommendation on record, but making sure that there's kind of a concrete list of things that we want to make sure get addressed in a lead agency memo review and upgrade, right?
You could do I'm sorry, but the TDM one, this could be separate.
Yeah, TDM,
recommendations.
I think this one is
It's
separate.
not-
Yep.
Yeah. It's very specific.
Sharice?
I just wanted to go back to consolidate or limit periods for agency comment, to share something that I received from a developer that there wasn't any conversation about this topic, so we just kind of moved on. It comes from my friend here, Alex. So basically, apparently there's a quarterly review of the sewer change, or anyway, they put in an application request for the review in May of 2022, but it's only just going to be reviewed this month. And then after that, it has to go for the county executive's sign off. So I just was sharing, I don't know if that's, maybe Alan can maybe share more about the quarterly review process.
If it's quarterly review, then it's probably something that's going through our administrative delegation process, category change.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, because of staffing, that process has been delayed. And we're trying to catch up with as best we can. I mean, it's always our intention to follow that schedule. But it's happened. And we try to keep the applicants informed of what's going on.
So I think that's a no.
It's not a lead agency issue. It's something internal at DEP, and we're trying to address that.
And the advocate that I am would say, funding, I had this conversation, like, that can be addressed, right? So if people need more staff to make this process go faster the way we want it to
Well,
go faster.
Right now, we're dealing with vacancy.
Okay, so you
And
don't
unless
have
you want,
anybody
unless we can
in that
overhaul
space.
the entire county hiring process, which is somewhat out of our wheelhouse, we move it along as quick as we can.
That's why it took so long.
Yeah.
If that's a response to why there are delays, I mean, that's a
Add that to
delay
the list.
for, right, I mean.
But I just want to be clear in terms of what you're saying, Sharice.
Mhm.
Is what you're bringing up referring to the agency comment process within the development review project?
I'm thinking it's falling under the idea of agency timelines. So right now, there is a pending development for a resident that has the ability to develop their land if they can get this category change. And they are waiting a year or more to get a response to that.
The connected issue for DRC is that a subdivision plan that requires a category change can't go to the board until that category change is granted. It basically
Also,
stops the clock.
Alan, don't category changes have to be approved by the council?
Not necessarily. No.
Okay.
Most of them are done administratively and approved by the director of DEP.
Okay, which ones go to,
Yeah, which ones did we get at the
because
council?
council does some, I'm not sure which.
The council unfortunately gets the ones that we recommend for denial primarily.
Thank you.
I've had council members say, can we approve something? Or deferral. There are specifics in the service area policies that tell us which cases have to go to the council and cannot be done administratively.
And Alan,
Because that adds to the, timeline, of course.
if they need a category change, we usually tell them, don't even submit the subdivision plan before you go talk to Alan and get that ball in motion. So that way they're not on any kind of time clock or spending money or time to deal with the application.
Yeah, I think to Sharice's point, so in staffing and policy, et cetera, I know you do look at the region and capacity for water and sewer, but they're done in bundles and that's a policy thing. So they're not done individually. So I don't know if that's worth revisiting or not.
We bundle them at the request of Park and Planning and WSSC. They did not want to get a constant stream of new requests coming through for review.
And that's why your friend can't get there.
And that is why we follow that schedule, accommodating our dear friends at Park and Planning and WSSC. EPS.
So we're getting more clear on what recommendation needs to be.
We just, in this sense, we need to place, and we've talked about this internally within our division, because it's a tracked issue for us, that we need to place a higher priority on moving those category changes forward, even if we have other things that have to slide.
And can some level of unbundling happen where it's like you just send bundles in smaller bundles so that you can move them quicker or something?
It's not so much the bundling, it's once the bundle process starts with the interagency review. So when we get to the point where we can make a recommendation for an administrative approval, that's where we need to move things forward faster.
Okay, so it would be just a recommendation to the.
It's placing the higher priority
DEP
on
to
that
move
process.
this quicker.
Yep.
So is the, I'm confused. Is this DR related and rises to the level of a recommendation, or is this just a recommendation of how this process should work more effectively in the relevant departments?
Category changes don't go to DRC and development process. They're separate and aside from the work that's done during development review.
But they affect what can go through development review.
Potentially.
So, Alan, how many category changes? I'd say less and less category changes are granted because most of the county does have water and sewer service, and we're nipping at the edges of what should be included, but you don't really grant that many anymore, do you? I know there's still requests, but.
We don't grant approval for as many as we used to, but still, the administrative process handles the majority of the cases that we get.
And those are more failing septic or something like that versus a new development, or?
Yeah, they're the cases the council doesn't want to see. They're things that we call consistent with existing plans. There are public health cases, there are budding means cases. Those are the three big ones. And in some instances, we can write an advance approval if the case clearly satisfies our policy requirements. But if we're doing something that is, a subdivision for 30 lots, and especially if it has conditions on it, like it's an RNC subdivision or something like that, we have to take it through the public hearing process. That's a requirement under state law. Wish we could avoid that, but we can't.
I think the thing that I would raise here again is, we talk about the large scale developer and then like the resident that has the ability and capacity to improve what they can. Right. So this resident is a Rockville resident with 2 lots and they're waiting, right? So, how you weigh that, how you slide that, who determines, how you weigh, how you slide that. I think the idea here is if there is an opportunity to look at it, it kind of falls under utilities, which we said we weren't going to have time to talk about, but it's also a part of the timeline. It's like the first step in the process. So I just wanted to share it.
It's essentially a pre-application issue.
Thank you.
And Alan, if you were to just talk about what might be done to expedite this?
It could be helpful to your group, because I think that's you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't have to feel like, oh, you're not doing what you're supposed to do. If there's a solution, then let's hear what that is to help make this process go better. If it's, hey, WSSC, the bundle thing is not working. If we're looking at the county in a perspective, and let's talk about Up County / East County, where there is a lot of septic, right? So if there's an opportunity to improve with the category change, we're looking at waiting this period of time before people can really, proceed or explore the option because of the vacancy or because, I don't know. I'm just hearing what you're saying.
As I said, it's a prioritization issue internally at DEP within our division. And we took a look at the statistics over the last 6 months and recognized that we had to place a higher priority on this process.
Okay.
It's basically one person doing the work of 2 people.
Which seems consistent with planning and, it's a budget issue. How about that? I think that it's fair to say that.
I would not say it's a budget issue. It's a hiring issue.
Okay. And then maybe a training. Is it a training?
And there's going to be training. Nobody comes into this process understanding it unless it's somebody who's been like, if Gary wanted to come in and be a planner.
You're getting a job offer, right?
Sounds like it.
Planner at DEP, we could probably work him into the process pretty quickly.
I mean, you guys are laughing, but like this is it. When they talk about, you talk about teacher shortage, right? And you talk about, okay, what can we do to change the credentialing so that, kids in high school who are studying to become teachers or at Montgomery College can help to fill the gap. So my train of thought here is if there's a gap and there's some way to fill that gap, just, take it into consideration because it could be a lot more tangible than we think it is if it's presented in the right way.
Sure.
Talking about budget, I know that Alan is saying that it's not a budget issue, it's a hiring issue. And we are having the same problem in WCC, but the way our general manager is trying to fix it became a budget issue. Because if you pay more the planners to the people that you hire, first of all, they will not go away. They will not go to another places. And then you have more retention, and then you have more applications coming to the company, a better benefit, better salary. So I think it's a budget issue. And about bundle, that I don't know, I can talk with my division manager and ask why we ask for bundling issue, bundle the applications. And my understanding was before was reviewed for permits section, and now we do it, and our project managers are the one that review all the change of category. So I can, that is something that we can help us.
Okay. All right, we're getting close to 11. I know, Robert, I don't know if we have an update about general counsel's availability.
I think they were still going up. I'll find out.
So we're just about at kind of the midway point, so I'm wondering maybe we take a quick 6-7 minute break. See where, when we come back, see where we are on availability of general counsel. If she's not immediately available, then I would say, let's go to amendments. And then when she becomes available, then we'll go to general counsel. Unless Amanda, she's really late, then we'll dig into that earlier. Okay. All right, 6-7 minute break. What's that?
I'll see if I can find that Washington Post article.
Robert, remind me Emily's last name, General Counsel.
Bias.
Bias. She will be here shortly online.
No. So Deborah Borden should be on in a minute.
Sorry.
You asked me Emily's
Yeah,
last
my
name.
bad. So Deborah Borden will be here shortly. Just for people, I think I sent this out last night, but the relevant pages in this Prince George's MOU are on pages 7 and 8 if you want to see it. So we're going to deal with People's Counsel first, but I do want to reserve 30 minutes. So starting around quarter of 12 to talk about the administrative things as well, amendments and administrative as well. So let me just tee this up. So I have up here the People's Counsel section, and there are now, based on the additional testimony that we got in late August, there's a third bullet that we saw kind of rise to the top. So the first bullet is around the state establishing a People's Counsel office. The second one is the council should fund the existing People's Counsel position. And then the third was along the lines of an alternative to the People's Counsel, something like a community zoning and land use resources officer, who would be informed on land use, provide public info on development applications, et cetera. I don't need to read the whole sentence for you. So there's kind of three things that have come through the testimony that we want to kind of have people weigh in on. Amanda has done a lot of work over the last couple of weeks to really try and understand the People's Counsel issue. I shared a back and forth between her and the General Counsel on 4 different questions she had, and then also a response last night to that response. But I just want to give you an opportunity, Amanda, to kind of set the stage for kind of what you're hearing in your community and kind of what you're focusing on and what you're feeling like you still need to know about this. Because I know that this issue has come up from the community many different times over the years.
Yeah, so thank you. And I didn't do a whole PowerPoint.
Yeah, you don't need to.
presentation, But we do have testimony on this, and I have been trying to dig in further. This is an issue that's had a lot of history, and I think it can sort of be divided into what we know and what we don't know, and what needs to be done to address the testimony that was received. So in some of the testimony recommended that there be an Office of the People's Counsel that the state establish, since MMC PPC is a state agency and there's already precedent of there being People's Counsel for state commissions, such as the Public Service Commission, that we look at it from a state level, from a higher level. And doing that, looked at Prince George's County and their model and what they're doing there. And they do have a People's Zoning Council office. It's independent, however, the funding appears to be I don't want to say convoluted, but there's an arrangement. That's what this MOU is, talking about how the funding goes through MMCPPC, and the wording says that the office is on behalf of the commission in MMCPPC. So it's in Prince George's County. It's in their statute and in their zoning code, and we have one for Montgomery County. However, it's not been funded in over a decade. People know the history of that, but assuming people do. So it was in some of the testimony, but so because this was a recommendation in the testimony, I thought it was important for this group to discuss it, and in light of the information that's come out about the Prince George's County side of MMCPPC and the fact that that side of MMCPPC has this resource but the Montgomery County side doesn't, and the fact that MMCPPC is a state agency, to look at it from a little bit of this different perspective. And one of the things that falls under the category of what we don't know is, I was told, so the law states that the office must provide an annual report to the district council in Prince George's County. And so I have gone down the rabbit hole of trying to find those reports and spoke to the general counsel of Prince George's Council yesterday, trying to find them. He's trying to locate them and provide them to give a little bit more information about how that office has been operating.
You're talking about the reports on the Prince George's side right now? Yeah, okay.
Yes, those reports are required by law. So that would be useful to have, but we don't have them today. I guess we're not able to locate them yet. But anyway, so it raises all sorts of questions. I'm sorry the delegate's not here for this part of the discussion, because I think it would be important to have that perspective. Yes, but
Great, thank you.
That's just to open this up.
That's really helpful, and thank you for the work and thinking you've done about this over the last couple of weeks. I know that General Counsel Deborah Borden is with us online. So Deborah, welcome. And first of all, thank you for being so responsive to Amanda's original email message. And for those who may not have had a chance to read that, and just kind of responding to the context of the testimony we've received and some of the things that Amanda opened with, would love to kind of hear your perspective on this, and maybe even history, because I know there's a lot of history here that I don't understand.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
My name is Deborah Borden. I am the General Counsel for the Park and Planning Commission. Thank you for having me this morning. I did put together those responses. I'm just here if you have any questions. I do know that the People's Zoning Council in Prince George's has been a position that's been around for quite a while. I think at least 2 decades, if not more than that. I know that Montgomery County used to have a People's Council. I think they called it a People's Council, not a People's Zoning Council. And that at some point, I think sometime after 2010, the county council in Montgomery County decided to not fund that position. And as far as I know, it has been not funded for a number of years. It may be as many as 10 years at this point. The People's Zoning Council in Prince George's, the way that it functions is that he is contracted with the county. So his contract as a professional, that, he is employed by the county on a contract basis, and his contract is with Prince George's County, not with the commission. The commission funds his office, and that is through an MOU that we do each year with Prince George's County. People have asked, why is that the case? Well, that's the case because that's the way that Prince George's County wants it. And so over the years, that has been their preference, to fund the office that way, and those funds come out of commission revenue. And the way that it functions operationally, the People's Zoning Council comes to planning board hearings on zoning matters. Generally, I have not actually seen the People's Zoning Council come for master plans, although that is listed in the MOU. Generally, we see the People's Zoning Council for, anything related to a zoning or a planned unit development case where the zoning is conditional. And he will appear at our hearings. He is there to protect the record and to ensure that the record of the case is is complete, is solid, and supports whatever decision is made. And he will ask questions and sometimes give information if he so fit, if he sees fit. He also attends the hearings before the county council. Now, the county council is a little different in Prince George's in that they actually hear appeals of site plans. This is not something that the Montgomery County Council does. And so during those hearings before the county council, I'm sorry, before the district council in Prince George's, the People's Zoning Council often opines on, the legal issues in the case and, and advises really the county council. That's what I've seen in practice. And that's basically my experience with the People's Zoning Council in Prince George's.
Thank you, Deborah. Appreciate that.
Very helpful because this is a bi-county agency, 2 counties, and we have this Prince George's County. Granted, it is set up a little bit differently. However, there's a pretty remarkable difference here, which is why maybe it's important to look at this from a state level perspective to bring that consistency.
Well, there certainly are a number of differences in the way that zoning and development review are done in the 2 counties. The 2 counties have 2 very different zoning ordinances, subdivision regulations. They have different, tree conservation regulations. We are one commission, but we have 2 counties, and the 2 counties can do things differently, and they often do.
And I'm not suggesting there be just one office for this. I'm just saying there is an office right now for Prince George's County, and there's not one funded. There's not one funded.
There's not one funded, absolutely.
So essentially, it doesn't exist.
Well,
if there's
it
not
does
somebody,
exist.
but if there's not somebody actually doing
That is
the role,
definitely
then
the issue, that there is not somebody in that position, but I think it's not clear to say there is no position. Because
Okay,
there is an unfunded position that does a very similar job.
but that's the same. I mean, okay, it's a position that
If it becomes
exists.
an issue of funding for that position and advocating for that for the council, I get that, but I'm just saying it's not clear to people listening to say there isn't that position in Montgomery County. There's an unfunded position to do a similar job in Montgomery County.
Okay, there's an unfunded position.
Right.
That I'm fine with that language, but the role of the position is not being performed and hasn't been performed
Because it's not been.
because it's not been funded.
Correct.
So there's the difference, I guess. And okay, Tom,
Yeah,
I have one more thing to add, but go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to ask, I have one question for council, and that is, you said that the zoning council in Prince George's protects the record is that before the planning board or only that role before the council? And how do they protect the record? I mean, is that to make sure that everything that's relevant gets into the record, or well, I don't quite understand what that role is. And then I was actually going to ask Amanda to expand on what she sees as what this role would be for Montgomery, but.
Sure, I think I can explain. So when the planning board, as well as when the council are hearing development review cases, these cases are to be heard on the record. And what that means from a legal standpoint is that, the decision maker is in the role like a judge would be, that their decision is supposed to be solely based on what is in the written record, the testimony, the documents that are before them in the case. They are not supposed to be making decisions based on, geez, what I saw last week when I was walking down the street, right? They have to be based on the record, and that protects everyone. So it's sort of like the same kind of protection that you would have in court, where the judge is not allowed to sort of bring in extraneous information, not allowed to sort of talk to the parties outside of the case and outside of the record, and not allowed to bring in anything that's not relevant to the findings that they have to make. And so oftentimes the People's Zoning Council will point out something. He'll say, well, that issue that is supposed to be included in that finding has not been covered yet by anything I've seen in the record. Where is that? And, when are we going to hear testimony on that? That's the kind of thing that he might say.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
And that also helps to clarify. So the role of a People's Council, Zoning Council, is not to represent parties. It's to represent the public interest. And you use the term protect everyone and making the record complete. So I think that's really important. And so there had been, and there is language, by the way, there is language. The office does exist on paper, just not in person. So on paper, this office exists. There is a description, and it's actually pretty similar to what's written up there in terms of the Zoning Council for Prince George's County. Not exactly, but similar. And so earlier this year, there was an idea, and that's part of the testimony that we received from Miles and Stockbridge, that you would essentially just have an information officer instead of a People's Council. And I mean, so I don't think that's what the testimony reflects. That is what people had asked for. It's certainly not what the testimony reflected when it was at the council, and it doesn't reflect the testimony. The other testimony we got, people are asking for there to be more of a similar office to what Prince George's County has. And Miles and Stockbridge, I will say, I mean, they're land use attorneys that represent private interests. So here, this is asking for a land use attorney representing public interests. Again, this is not unheard of. This is very similar to Public Service Commission and their People's Council, which is state level.
Then Gary, and then Sharice.
I want to disagree slightly because, well, yes, this is an office that exists, not just in Prince George's County. Baltimore has one, Howard has one. In 2008, there was an OLO report, our Office of Legislative Oversight, and it found many problems with the Montgomery County Office of the People's Council.
It also found many benefits.
There were many benefits as well, but the reason the council stopped funding it is because they said, we have these issues we need to address. The office isn't quite working as we intended, so we're not going to fund it until we fix those issues. And I admit that, yes, those issues have not been fixed yet, so which is why the office hasn't been refunded. But part of the questions raised were, should it be informational? Should it be advocacy? How should it be funded? Should it be appointed? Should it be merit? What decisions should they look at? It's like it was a very long list of questions to ask. And so, and that report surveyed the community. So developers provided feedback, the different agencies said how their work with that office had been. And that is the background of why the position hasn't been funded. So I just wanted everyone to know that piece. The bill that was proposed was based on the feedback in the report that many people thought it shouldn't be an advocacy role. And so the bill was to say, how about instead we make it informational? But then, a lot of testimony didn't like that idea either. So I just wanted to explain what the delay has been, because I think that's a large list of questions for this group to go through and answer. I think it's a great recommendation to say, like, whoever we decide should look at whether we fund the office and what the role of that office should be. I just am a little hesitant to say this group should decide what the role of the office should be, because yes, the position exists on the books, it's in the code, but the council has already made it clear that they're not sure if they agree with the way it's currently written, and that's why it's not been funded. So I just want to give that background from the council perspective.
So I've very, I've got Gary, then Sharice. I just want to make sure that we all understand. So the position that exists but is not funded is not a planning. It's not in planning. It's not in
council
commission,
position.
It's in county government, right? Okay. And there is a set of roles and responsibilities for that position already established.
Yes.
Okay, just want to be clear on that. Gary, then Sharice.
So, yeah, you just answered all my questions, but I got a lot of questions, and it comes down to what's the responsibility, because in the past, that was one of my, this is a council right now, or in the past, it was a council position. And the zoning office with the hearing examiner right now is a council position, right? So, and we're talking about development review where the assumption is you already have zoning. So the whole rezoning process, and there's floating zones opportunities right now. But that's something this group really hasn't gotten into right now, because if you don't have zoning or you want to change the zoning, there's a whole nother process that we get into with filing a zoning application. Park and Planning and the Planning Board eventually does make a recommendation, but then you have a hearing with the whole zoning office, the hearing examiner, they write a report, and then it goes, ultimately the zoning decision goes to the county council. And that's a whole process we haven't talked about here. So that might be worth taking offline or talking about that. I will say that we're doing, in the past, we did a number of rezoning cases, but with the current master plans, most of the master plans recommend zoning, and then the council approves that master plan, and then subsequently they'll approve that rezoning. So there's less and less zoning cases. There's still, out there, or there's still a couple of master plans that recommend a piece be rezoned. But and that's where that that zoning officer would partake in that. So I don't know if, has it been more that they participate in development review, or I don't know if some of those comments are really clear, but it's a good question, so. A lot there.
Okay, yes, we'll go
Sharice.
around. I mean, my answer might be in his answer, because Lavu helped answer part of the questions that I have, which is just giving us the background. And the question that I had maybe for council, as I'm looking at the specific comments on here, in comparison to the email response that we received, is that these comments are very specific to, community-oriented development. And if I'm reading this correctly, which I could not be because I'm totally skimming it, is that a lot of the review and recommendations or decisions that came out of People's Council for Prince George's County or on a much larger scale of development. So I guess my question is the process, right? So in your process in Prince George's County, and let's just take the Church Road Airport, for example. That was a big one going on there. Does the citizens in Bowie, for example, didn't agree with the development plans for that airport? Would they come to People's Council to get guidance on how to, I'm just going to say fight, for lack of a better word, against the recommendations for what were proposed for that airport? And I'm asking that because I'm just trying to understand how that process could potentially work in Montgomery County based on the comments that we're looking at.
I'm smiling because I don't really know enough to tell you how that process works. Okay. From the standpoint of the People's Zoning Council interacting with citizens. I've never actually seen that play out. I can tell you that at our last budget hearing, he went before us, the People's Zoning Council went before us, and he did talk to the council members about how he is a resource for the citizens. But since we are not involved in that interplay, and so I don't know how that actually works, and I don't know how, what kind of substantive help he gives to the citizens. I can't speak to that because I've never seen that. The only thing that I've seen is that the People's Zoning Council comes to the planning board hearings and to the district council hearings, and he opines sometimes on zoning cases. So not all cases, just zoning cases. What else he's doing in terms of interacting with the community, I can't speak to that.
So I want to make sure that I understand. So the way the position is currently in Montgomery County, is it primarily to weigh in on zoning issues? It's not. Broader. But the broader includes development review kind of under that umbrella. Got it. Okay. Amanda?
Okay, going back to the OLO report, which I did read. So they did identify some issues with the office, but there were a majority of comments, both from members of the public and the development community, saying that the office was valuable in terms of giving technical assistance through the process. So it's not like that this office is terrible and is of no value. Like there was actually a significant amount of value found in that report. Whether it needs to be tweaked and the role like looked at more closely, like I think, that folks could agree with that. The issue I'm raising today is the fact that and because we are talking about state legislation, and that we need more information. If Ms. Borden is saying she's not quite sure, and I've asked for the reports, we want to know what have they been working on in Prince George's County? What has that People's Zoning Council been working on? That's why it'd be so helpful to have those annual reports to know how they are interacting with the community, to know how they are, spending that time. But the issue here for this group is that this was raised in testimony as maybe this is an opportunity to look at this and reevaluate what's working or not in terms of the bi-county disconnect or inconsistency between these offices. This is one bi-county agency, state level agency. There's now, not everything lines up perfectly when you look at between Prince George's and Montgomery County, but this is an area that folks have identified as being important to look at. So
I'm wondering, because, one thing that I'm clear on as a Prince George's County resident is, the planning agency in my county kind of, within the purview of what the commission says, they do their own thing, right? So, and they make their own decisions. They have a separate history, so on and so forth. And I'm also not clear, just based on the little that I've read and what I've heard today, whether looking at Prince George's is kind of the right, for lack of a better term, benchmark. I mean, I believe I think you said Baltimore City, Howard County. So this is not necessarily an unusual thing. And, there may be other experiences that we want to explore if you want to go forward with this that go beyond, well, Prince George's does it, so should we, right? It's like, I wouldn't go by that. I would go by, what role could this play that could really remain valuable for the county?
Yes, I'm not limiting it to Prince George's County. I'm just using that because MMC PPC.
Right.
And this is a state level issue, and MMC PPC is a state agency. But I think looking at other is important. But the question is, what is the right structure here? And should it be more state-based versus county-based?
I'd love to hear other perspectives on this because I know this is if you go back to 2008, this is an issue that either continues to be lurking under the surface, above the surface, whatever. How can we think about this as this work group, and is there something valuable here we can weigh in on?
I'll provide my perspective, and this is from someone who worked with the People's Council when they were here. It was, I would say, not good because we spent more time educating the People's Council on all the things going on in development review and through the process, and then usually correcting that People's Council for things that had been said to the public. So it was not as effective on our end, and that may have been the person. It may have been, a couple other things, but I did not see it as very effective on, for us. And for someone that would have been was at the county level, you would think that person in that job would have known kind of the ins and outs of what needed to happen. So I would struggle with the idea of someone at a state level who may not know Montgomery County, may not know the policies, the practices, the rules and regulations, to try and get up to speed and kind of be the all people's counsel for whatever that means. And again, I'm not quite sure what role that person would be, if they're an advocate or if they're there to guide the public in the process. And that's the part I think I struggle with, without them being kind of an impediment to what I think we're here for, which is improving the process.
I did want to add one more thing, because a lot of the conversations over the last few years have come down to the information versus advocacy.
Okay.
I will say, I think the one thing that everyone agrees on is it should at least have the informational piece, because as we have all learned, the development review process is complicated. There's many different agencies, and it would be great to have one resource that anybody could go to and say, this is being filed. What do I do? Where do I go? Like, that would be excellent. I know one issue in the 2008 report had been, at the time, we didn't have a Racial Equity Social Justice Act. And so there were complaints about what communities the People's Council was serving. Now that we have that act, that's something we would like factored into the bill to make sure this person is like serving all our different communities. So I just want to flag that as like, that's the piece that there's, I think, definitely agreement on, but we do need to refine the rules, because there is a difference between commenting on a master plan, advocating for the community. I mean, one thing that came up when we did the budget session this year is it says advocate for the public interest. Well, is the public interest having more housing or protecting a neighborhood that doesn't want multifamily dwelling? So even defining public interest is really difficult. And like, I don't know, this group can define public interest. I've written 3 staff reports on People's Council and I can't define it. So I think maybe if what this work group can do is say, here are the things we think this office should definitely provide, and maybe even just say, here are the 2 options for where it should be housed, and then that can be looked at, because ultimately it's going to need a bill anyways. But I think maybe that's how the recommendations boil down, is like kind of the way we did lead agency of like, when you look at this, please address these points.
I believe there was a report done for the earlier bill, the racial equity and social
For
justice.
For Bill 1823, there was, yeah.
There was, yeah. So I think that's important for folks to go back and read that report.
Which report is this?
For the bill that would create an alternative office, there was a racial equity statement, but not for the office as it had existed before that.
And I believe it supported having a People's Council.
It did.
Yes.
That was from when?
March 23, maybe?
This year.
When's budget? May 2023.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's important to know too.
Therese?
I think it's important to like just manage the expectation, based again on the comments and then based on what Robert said. And when we talk about the community meetings, it does end up going back to education, right? And how informed the community is about the process, which I think we're all, trying to work to get to that. But if the expectation is that the People's Council is going to be like serve as the land use attorney almost to fight for the perspective of the people, I'm not seeing that. And I know we don't have to use Prince George's as a benchmark, but it seems to me the tone from these comments subject it to that type of role where they're like, and it speaks to the equity, because one of the comments is stating, some communities can afford to get an attorney to support their vision or to support their argument against a development, whereas some communities cannot. So in the case where you have a community that cannot, can this People's Council sort of be that stopgap, for them? So I think it's important to be clear about managing the expectation.
Yeah, and clarifying the role, right? What the role or roles, yeah.
Well, and I'm sorry, I was just going to say.
So let me just see who wants to weigh in. Just
I have my hand up.
Diane, then Amanda, then Robert.
So this is a really interesting discussion, and I do think it's a really important conversation, particularly around some of the problems that were experienced with the People's Council. And from the development perspective, I recall how terribly long it elongated certain decisions that needed to be made, even for example, for enlarging and creating a wing for suburban hospital. That said, I'm just going to put on the table that maybe there's another idea, like a people's ombuds person, or a community facilitator for purposes of addressing equity issues, assuring that people's voices are heard in the zoning and the entitlement process. So I just wanted to offer that as something to think about.
I was just going to return to what Cherie said. Yes, there has to be this balance, and you can read the role, and I do think it should be clarified. Yeah. The goal was never advocacy. The goal was a complete record and ensuring that there was participation in the process. It's a very complicated process, right? And I don't know the individual who had served in the capacity before, but you have to have the right person for the job, right? And we do have this precedent of other people's councils. So let's take advantage of that and look at those and see what they're doing right and take that and use it. This group isn't going to come to that description, but it could be a recommendation.
Robert?
I was just going to say I agree with the balancing perspective of it. And one of the things that we experienced is it was a duplication of effort. So and planning had to kind of play that role of providing the feedback, providing the direction, and then advocating for the community, which we do a lot of for these applications. And so anyway, I just say as long as the balancing doesn't mean that this is even more of a duplication of effort on all ends.
So, Gary, and then I want to ask a question because I'm not understanding kind of what this might look like at the state level. Gary.
Well, let's not say, I think folks are maybe saying the same thing, but maybe this is a task force, because if you look at what the People's Council did previously, they were involved in master plans and involved in zoning cases, which, talking about changing residential, commercial, all that's, a big discussion. But when we get to development review and the scope of this group, you have a master plan, so you're supposed to implement it, and you have zoning, you need to go by those rules. So if you do what traditionally was done with the People's Council, it's kind of a whole nother process. So that's a whole nother series of meetings. And then is there a question, do they get plugged into development review or not? In my mind, it's more straightforward with development review, because if it's zoned residential, you got proposed zoning, or something that complies with zoning, and then obviously all the agencies review it for the technical. So it's kind of defining the role and where they get plugged in and what would work. So
yeah, I think that's a very important point, and I do think it's hard. Like we're talking about development review in this specific part, but maybe this belongs, nudged over here a little bit.
Right, because it touches other things, right?
But when you look at the timeline we were all given, like the snake of everything you have to go through, right?
More time to that part off the sheet.
The general public wouldn't necessarily know where that would get plugged in on the snake.
I was just going to ask quickly, I think I'm kind of building off of Gary's question, but I think this sounds like an interesting tool, and the fact that it exists in paper and that there's been other work on it and stuff is a good point, worthwhile. It feels like maybe something for this group on focus is what are the things that this tool might accomplish that are recommendations that relate back to DRC and improving the process and things that maybe could be something that's then hey, when this gets looked at, these are the kinds of things that can be helped with, so that we don't spend time sort of cycling on where it could be or what it could do, which seems kind of really beyond ours.
I'm happy to send around some of the other information I gathered, and hopefully we'll get reports. Maybe somebody else would like to request them as well. Just to have that information, and to have information about the other counties too.
So let me just ask quickly, Deborah, do you Do you know a good way of getting the reports that Amanda is talking about?
Beyond filing a request with the county council staff, I think that's the best way to do it. It would be the county council staff that would gather up those reports and that would receive them each year. So council staff should have that.
Kate, then Ellen?
I think this is an interesting idea, and I think that this is something worth exploring because as we've discussed, this is really a complicated process. The thing I want to reiterate, and I think Sharice brought this up and a couple others, is there's an educational component to this. Development for the communities can be nerve-wracking for certain people and difficult, and even when we're following the zoning, the master plans, and everything else. And so there's an educational piece that if you do think, there's an educational piece that there needs to be an educational piece for the public. You cannot, I don't think this position should be where you are advocating or providing impediments to things that are already decided in zoning, master plans, things like that. There's a lot of things that are in the zoning, in the master plans, and so on and so forth that people may not necessarily like, but we have to follow. And so my concern is that we're trying to streamline the process, and by adding another body, a person without the appropriate education, is that going to make things more difficult for people to understand the process?
We also have a planning academy, which we should.
Right. All right. So Ellen, then Henry. Tiffany, did you want to add to that? No? Okay. Planning Academy. I've heard it.
It seems like, and maybe I'm not interpreting this correctly, but it seems like the focus here is really on advocacy for the public in the planning and development review process. And I find myself in the midst of this all the time, not advocating for a particular point of view, but helping the public understand what the process is and how they can get plugged into it. And oftentimes I'm advising groups that are diametrically opposed on the same issue. So I have to be very careful about what I tell them. I educate all the time. Nobody comes into this process of category change, at least the individual property owner, knowing what this is all about. And I spend a lot of time explaining it to them. So I think it's not so much to advocate for a particular point of view, it's to ensure that those points of view get expressed to the decision makers.
All right, who did I? Henry.
I'm not sure if there was somebody else before me or not, but I'd like to circle back on what I was saying. Like, since I just did, like, it feels like we just said public education like 3 times really kind of strongly, and it feels to me like we're actually possibly in danger of losing that, which is the really important piece, it sounds like, and like obfuscating it with the People's Council kind of thing. That like maybe we actually what appealing is saying there's this really important piece because it's possible that could be the tool that can help accomplish that. But if the public educational piece is what really matters, like looking at what other counties' people's councils do, isn't necessarily going to help keep driving towards the public education thing that we want. If they're doing something interesting in Baltimore or Howard or Prince George's, where they have different development review systems and systems that we have here, that may or may not be applicable at all. In fact, I think it's likely not to be super helpful in terms of what could happen here, because again, it gets us away from what do folks actually need and what do we think would help improve our existing system here, and like saying focus on that instead of just because it exists somewhere else doesn't necessarily mean it's the right tool for us to try to add in.
But I want to make sure that I'm following you. So are you saying that some kind of role still needs to be played on public education?
I'm saying I think it sounds a little bit to me like what we're actually talking about is the need for more public education, and that feels like something that could be a recommendation, but that the discussion about the People's Council, while it's really interesting, doesn't seem like it's actually something that makes a lot of that there's going to be a very specific recommendation on that this group could make.
I mean, so there are lots of land use attorneys throughout Montgomery County that help developers through every single step of the way. That whole snake, they get help. They get lots of help through the entire thing. There is nothing equivalent of that for public.
And I think that's a great point. But like, I guess I'm kind of suggesting like focus on that instead of the saying People's Council, because it's not clear that the People's Council would necessarily be that or could be that. So it's like kind of stepping back from the fact that there could be this position and thinking about what are the recommendations that you want for that position. And so like, that sounds more like, I mean, that last bit sounds a little bit more like an advocate for people as opposed to just education for people, but those kinds of things are the kinds of recommendations and needs that are more tangible than just, hey, People's Council.
Kate, I can't remember, did you have your hand up before and I didn't come back to your. So, I mean, there's a lot of things on the table here. It seems like it's going to be hard to come up with a concrete recommendation about what should be done with regard to People's Council. I think the one thing that's still mystifying to me is if the first bullet was around the state should establish an office. So what does that really mean? So the state would establish it, the state legislature would establish it for that position to be housed at Montgomery Planning?
So that's the one piece that I do have an opinion on. I mean, I think, I understand, Amanda, what you want from a People's Council, and I was here when we had one. I definitely get that. I definitely see how this is an equity issue too. I think that we have the position already established in the county. It's just a matter of funding it and figuring out what it's supposed to be doing. And I'm sure many other things that I'm not capturing because Lavu's the one that really knows all of them. But I think we should really work on that position, the one in the county, and figuring out what does that look like. I don't think a state level position would really be helpful here. There already is the position. It's a matter of getting what we need for that one. So,
and I think it was raised as doing it at a state level because the county has kind of dragged their feet in terms of addressing it for the last since 2008, 2010. And so if the county's not willing to do it, let's look to the state.
So would the state fund it? I mean, that's my question is you are suggesting this is a state level position. And what I don't know, and maybe Deborah knows, does the state tell in the land use article or where all these things are already listed about how each county should undertake its commission and land use role, whether it tells them they have to have certain positions and fund certain positions? My guess is it does not do that. So I am not so sure that even saying that there should be state legislation that changes that part of the code or the land use article would even achieve a funded position.
There is state legislation that says there needs to be the People's Council for the Public Service Commission. So that is a sort of a model. I don't have the answer for you of how it would be funded. This is all just meant to be the discussion about what various ways this could look like.
Defined so that if we try to get to a recommendation, we really understand what we're recommending. And that's why, is it possible?
And I really wish that we had a state representative here for this discussion, to be honest.
I don't know that she would know that.
But
I'm sorry, Alan.
Yeah, if we use these hands together, it would be very confusing. I seem to recall in reading some of the testimony on this, is part of the reason this came up as a state issue is because Park and Planning is a state chartered agency?
Yeah. So, that's what I was trying to clarify.
Yeah.
That is why.
but we didn't have, I mean, it's not part of us, it's a county position.
Yes, but it's not, you don't see yourselves as a state agency, right?
We're a bi-county agency.
Right.
State agency.
We are a state agency.
Yeah, but we're a bi-county agency, and I think of I'm just saying that this particular position is currently in the county. That's what I'm saying.
From a funding perspective, this MOU suggests that the county invoice the commission to reimburse the payment. Like that's the structure.
That's in Prince George's County.
This is the MOU that Prince George's County has. That's their model. So to answer the question, Pam asked, like, okay, well, who's funding it? So it sounds like the state funds it through the commission, but the county has to invoice for reimbursement. It's just like the grants.
Yeah.
You don't get paid.
So how is it set up? So it's an unfunded position, but if it were to get funded tomorrow,
The county would fund it.
the county, not the.
The county council, yeah, approves the budget.
The budget for parking plan.
Yeah, right. The money for
And for
parking
the
planning
county.
also comes from the county. It doesn't come from the state.
But then, they invoice to get reimbursed. So it's like you're paying it, but then you get the money back.
No, but
No.
they invoice to the commission's budget is supplied by the county.
Right, all of,
Not
either
by the
it's
state.
commission or it's county, it's still over.
That makes no, maybe that's the recommendation. Maybe that's the recommendation to the state. Hey, state,
More meetings.
we don't have money. to
That's where the
fund
beans are piled up.
So I want to make sure we wrap this up because I really do want to move to amendments and administrative. I mean, so is the basic recommendation, I mean, it seems like there's lack of clarity about the real roles and responsibilities for such a position that would most benefit Montgomery County, right? And so, is the recommendation around our new favorite word today is task force, I think? Is it to create, for the county to create some kind of interagency task? I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out how to kind of close out this conversation.
I've got a question for Amanda, and you don't have to answer this now, but so my 2 cents, my opinion on why we don't have a, so this position was supposed to be neutral and independent, not representing the council. And I think politically, working for the council and I'll pick on Marty Clobber since he's no longer with us, but anyways, the council got pissed off at that because they disagreed with the, People's Council. And again, that.
Because of their independence.
Independence, yeah. And then so that's in the mix. But what I'm also hearing is there's a need for an advocate for citizens going through the process. And I'm thinking those are probably two different things, maybe not, but that's something to think about. So.
Can I just say one thing about that? The history of the People's Council roles in Maryland has been fraught with that very dichotomy. Okay, on the one hand, they're supposed to be an educational, informational kind of role. They help the public to understand complicated bureaucracy, complicated regulatory problems. But on the other hand, there are certain people who expect the People's Council to be their lawyer, to be their advocate, and to adopt certain positions that they want the People's Council to adopt. And that always causes problems. And so if there's any decision to go forward or to recommend any kind of retooling of a People's Council for Montgomery, I would just caution you to deal with that or to understand that that is a tension that will be present no matter how you do this. And so you've got to make sure that you really vet that whole discussion between advocacy versus education, because the advocacy gets you in trouble every time, because the public interest can be very difficult to identify, because that person A is a member of the public and they disagree with person B, who's a member of the public. And so that's always a problem. And it's been that case, that's been the case from Baltimore City all across the state, whoever's had a People's Council.
I'm going to give Tim the final word on this because I really do want to make sure we spend at least 15 or 20 minutes on amendment.
Just Diane sent an email to the group during this that says how Howard's is structured, and it speaks to that issue. that, they're not there to provide legal representation to any one particular citizen. So that gets to that
And
issue.
that is in the current description of Montgomery County.
Montgomery County.
Whether that happened or not, that's a
Right.
different
Exactly.
situation.
Yeah.
But it is in there, and I agree that's something that would need to be made abundantly clear.
Yeah, expectations are.
So-
The expectation, so.
So, I mean, our smaller group can kind of see if we can massage some wording out of this. But Amanda, I mean, if you think, based on what you've heard in this conversation and kind of the complexities and the conflicts and tensions, if you want to also think about language that maybe this group could get behind, I'm happy to have you send something to me by Friday.
By Friday at 12.
I mean, all our recommendations are like a sentence or two, like it's
Yeah,
not a
okay,
paragraph.
sure.
It's a lot of like evaluate, discuss.
Right. It's a sentence. It's not like giving
We're like
the
meetings.
contextual history of where this recommendation comes from. All right, so let's see if we can quickly get at least a couple things here around amendments and administrative plans. Because one of the things, at least I think we talked about one of the meetings recently and internally, is especially this first bullet could be potentially really critical for making some improvements on the development, kind of tangible improvements to the DR process. So create a streamlined approach for plan amendments. Currently, minor amendments are following the same 120-day clock as major. Christina.
Sorry, I just want to interrupt before we jump into this, because I heard Tiffany say something that we hadn't actually talked about. And so I want to make sure, like, if we're having recommendations coming out, they need to be about stuff we actually talk about. And I know that we were waiting for Tiffany to provide maybe any recommendations for public involvement.
I thought we provided that recommendation last time.
Which one?
We didn't have any recommendations
We
for
didn't
me.
get something specific.
Right.
On doing the actual academy, doing the people.
So the planning academy as a recommendation, was that the main recommendation you had?
Yeah, that is
Okay.
something we discussed.
Okay.
We talked about a planning academy for almost an hour
I thought
last.
that was a good idea. I didn't know that.
No, we didn't actually talk
And this,
about
I'm
it.
so glad. We didn't talk about it?
No, you said, you brought up that there were planning committees.
talked
academies,
about
but we didn't
it
talk
for-
about the actual, like,
It's okay, we can go back.
we could go back and talk about it.
And we can watch the tape, it's fine. I just
Just
didn't think
because-
it was a recommendation, I thought it was this is a good idea.
No, I just don't want to feel delusional. We
Yeah.
did not, thank you. We
Talked about it.
No, it didn't come up. We talked
We didn't
significantly
talk
about it because Steve talked about the fact that he
Just
had
a little
had
conversation.
in
but I don't
Howard
think it's a
County.
little-
We talked about the fact that Prince George's County had just started one. We talked about the fact that Baltimore County had started one. We talked about we had a conversation.
I think there might be a difference between talking about and recommending. Did we recommend?
So,
That's why I want to
That's-
yeah,
understand.
we'll
Exactly
we'll get
right.
a specific recommendation, then we'll get it, I'll work with it.
If you keep saying that, I'm confused.
Okay, I'll send something to you.
No, so,
What's
okay, no,
confusing
because
about
I
it?
want to talk about it. If we're going to talk about Planning Academy, I do want to talk about it. Because what I remember from last time is we didn't actually talk about it very much. I heard Tiffany mention that there were planning academies, I think in Howard and Baltimore, and the value of them, but we didn't actually have a conversation about them. I remember Steve saying, I think you were involved in a planning academy, and that you said that they reach only about 25 people per year.
No, 25 per session. So
Per-
they've had
per
like a
session.
dozen of them.
Do they have multiple sessions per year or just one
Yeah,
session?
multiple sessions per year.
We did talk about it.
So,
Because we talked about the cohorts.
no,
It's not that we didn't talk.
But if we
about
want to
the
have more
topic of
discussion,
planning
that's okay.
academy.
We
Is
just
there
want to
one
know what to
land on-
put
is there-
as the recommendation.
Is there
like-
something we
Yes.
should put in a report moving
Yeah.
forward about?
Yes.
We want to know how
That
to
was
phrase
not
the
clear.
recommendation.
This is an excellent example of why consensus and the way we've been doing consensus hasn't been great. Because we've said, if we talk about it, then we're only gonna recommend what we've talked about. And the fact that we couldn't even be clear about the fact that we talked about this for at least 30 minutes.
But I think most of the people in this room will say, I mean, could anyone here verbalize what the recommendation was from that 30-minute conversation?
Yeah, I could.
Yes.
I could say that the recommendation was to implement planning academies and look to these other counties for an example. That's what I took away from that discussion. I thought everybody saying it was a good idea.
talk about it at all, because if we're implementing planning academies in that way, then it means that planning's doing it, and so then I want to be able to talk about it because of something that we
question
would be
came up.
doing. So here's what I would say if we had an opportunity to talk about this, and so that's why I brought it up, is that we used to do something called open houses when we were at our old building prior to COVID. And we would have planning open houses where the community can attend, and it was an educational session. And I think like doing something like that again is certainly something we can certainly do again. I think the planning academies we can look into. I think that might be a little bit more of something that we'd have to explore because it might be a staffing thing. But I also wondered, this was my biggest question, and Tiffany, about the planning academy idea, was what I took out of what you said last week was that you said we need to go where the people are and go where they are. And my concern is about a planning academy is that we're going to get, the Amandas, the Sharice, and the people that are already kind of plugged in to the system. And I really thought that what we were trying to do was reach people that aren't being reached.
So I'm so glad you said that, because Steve talked about the fact that Howard County and Baltimore County had a very different model, and that Howard County's was for open to everybody, and Baltimore County actually was very pointed towards communities of color, and that we should explore what we want to do in Montgomery County. So we had already discussed, it wasn't, so in the talking about going to people was not about the planning academies, it was about outreach in general. So let me just be clear about that.
I'm sorry, I don't remember that conversation.
Do others here remember this conversation? I just want to know I'm not crazy. I'm like, I said
It is in the note.
we spoke about this for well over 45 minutes.
Well, I don't think we spoke about planning academies for that long. We spoke about public involvement for that long, and planning academies was
Part
one
of
the
that
number of things we talked about.
Precisely.
Okay.
Sharice, you had your hand up?
I was gonna say, I can share, I don't know, if you want me to send it to you, the outline for the Planning Academy from Prince George's County, so you can have a frame of reference if that's helpful. But I think something that's maybe a hybrid, because the planning academies are exclusive in that you have to apply, at least in Prince George's County, whatever. We're using people as frame of reference to see what could work here. But you have to apply, you have to be accepted, and it is a small cohort of people versus the aspect of education that we're talking about that is more community oriented and public facing. But I think also to the point, the open houses, who's coming, when are they being held? Are they going to be conducive to the audience that we feel like needs this education? It really is a very strategic approach to the marketing of it, the programming of it, the location of it. It's a lot more than just saying we need to do it if you want it to be effective. And I do think that it's something that from a regional perspective, it could help to, cultivate what it needs to be for the specific regions based on the cultures of those regions and how they function and operate. So that's my 2 cents. And if that's helpful to send that out to everybody, I'll have it.
So I know we do have, I hear from our communications chief that we do have that, and we've been in touch with Prince George's Planning, but they received 300 applications for only 30 slots. So I guess that's what I was trying to understand, and I was hopeful that we could use Tiffany's expertise to figure out if there was a better way of doing this, because I know we brought the idea of a planning academy came up, but we never really talked about what does this mean for Montgomery County, and I'm not sure that that's really reaching the people we wanted to reach. So
maybe the Planning Academy for Prince George's County, for Montgomery County, let's say you get 300 applicants, turns into the people that get invited to the open house type event. That way it's not like these class structure, but you get the people who are interested in participating, but then you don't cut them off because they didn't make it into this cohort. I think those are the people who want to know what's going on.
So we didn't get into the weeds of what it would look like. because we didn't have the time to get into the weeds of what it would look like, whether planning would do it, whether council would do it, whether a nonprofit would do it, whether we would do a different one in East County, whether it'd be a different one in Bethesda, Up County. We didn't get into those details. It was a recommendation that, like others, that don't necessarily have a whole lot of infrastructure created, because that's literally 3, 4, 5, 6 meetings worth of work. What it looks like, what we're trying to accomplish. And I think the cohort ideas, because we've talked about just development review and planning. How many meetings have we had? So the fact that we would be able to do this in an open house type of session for the public who's even less knowledgeable about this than we are, I think is, what's the word?
Not realistic.
Yeah, it's not trying to achieve what we want to achieve. We want it to be deeper, not broader, right? And so if we're in this amount of time we spent on talking about the People's Council and what that person should do and how they should educate, right? If we can do that in a deeper way with a broader audience, why wouldn't we? The details of that we have not worked out. Whether or not it's something that Park and Planning would lead, like I said, not sure. Not sure if you even want to lead it. Not sure if we want you to lead it. Who knows? Maybe the community wants to lead it. Maybe Amanda wants to lead it. We didn't get into those. I'm not giving you a job of doing. But what I'm saying is perhaps you are not the best people to educate them, right? Perhaps you have a slant that people will feel, or a lack of trust, quite frankly. And we talked about trust, right? And we thought it would be if Park and Planning did lead it, and a bridge to create more trust from community to Park and Planning. So no, we didn't get into those details. Happy to get into those details today, if that's what you all want.
I guess I need to understand what a recommendation is.
Me too.
So I think, I mean, there's a lot of choice points in something like this, right? So Howard County and Baltimore City did it very differently. It was both, if I remember correctly, they were both conducted out of the planning agency, but there was a different target audience for each, right? So I think who are we targeting is going to be a really important decision that we're not necessarily going to make today, but it's got to be kind of up front and center in terms of who are we trying to serve in a planning academy, right? And then the whole idea of Howard, I don't know what Baltimore City has done, but Howard County did one, and they were, there was a lot of interest, and so they just began doing more and more and more, and there continues to be an appetite for it. They had no idea that they would be doing 12 by now, and if COVID hadn't come, they probably would have done more. So part of it, but I think who you're targeting matters more than anything. Who are we most wanting to educate about these issues so that they can participate more effectively in the process? Gary?
I was just saying, as far as recommendation, I think Tiffany already said it. Explore the establishment of a planning academy. And then all the stuff you just said comes later. And if we need another sentence, that.
But I guess my thing is who's exploring? Should I just say the planning department will explore?
We are
establishing well, we're not coming together again, guys. So that's why I'm saying, we need actual, recommendations. Somebody needs to be.
We need a task force. I heard you said, if the recommendation is just that it should be explored,
Yeah,
we don't
need the next
explore
sentence.
anything, it's just gonna hang out there afterwards. So,
Right, I mean, if that's the way you want me to write it.
yeah.
No, we'll write it and I'll send you something later.
Okay, all right, yeah, but whatever gets written should identify kind of who's going to be involved in kind of leading whatever that exploration is, right? Okay, all right, can we talk about plan amendments really briefly? So the first recommendation is around creating a streamlined approach for plan amendments. I know nothing about this, so I don't know kind of how this gets bogged down, where this gets bogged down, in what context it gets bogged down.
I guess
Is
what I'm
something that needs
asking,
to be streamlined?
what, I'm trying to interpret the comment here. Are they implying the minor amendment timeline should be shorter?
Yeah.
I think that's what I,
Okay.
that's what I meant.
I was like, I'm not interpreting.
Because-
They have the same 120 days.
I'll just give you my perspective on this. So there's a process. You meet with staff. and then there's a checklist. But there's a determination when you meet with staff, if it's minor, major, I think there's even one category in between. And that's what you submit or don't submit as part of that checklist. But I think right now there's no timeline because that info gets submitted, but then other things are on timelines and there always seems to be other priorities. So amendments don't take priority, maybe is the case. And it comes back to workload, et cetera. So that's, I think, where folks are saying amendments take too long.
So I think, the biggest difference is the ones that go to the board.
Right.
They still follow that 120 or the 90 or whatever the time frame is.
And maybe, and those just take time, but again, those are kind of on a schedule then.
Yeah, and the administrative ones, they definitely go a lot sooner than that, unless they get kicked up to the board because we've had opposition from, the community to reevaluate that. But those are typically, I want to say, we have a 15-day period where we get comments, and then that goes to the director for signature for any administrative ones.
And I think expectations are, so I've heard a couple clients say this, so if I can get a whole plan reviewed and approved in 120 days, why can't I get a simple amendment sooner?
Because they're not simple.
Expectations, obviously, but I think that's a little bit where this is coming from.
But I do think, this has come up a number of times, and I think it's definitely something that we can continue to look at in terms of how quickly we can process what's a minor amendment. Again, some of that's going to be staffing and the workload and when it's submitted. But
when it says plan amendments, so is this site plan amendments?
so it could be, so we have sketch plan, we have preliminary plan, and we have site plans. And so all of them, of course, can be amended in various ways. And depending on what the amendments for, some of them may go to the board, some of them may not.
This is an amendment after the board has approved something?
Yes.
Yeah, so I'll give you an example of one we just met with. Patrick left, but with the Up County group, a couple weeks ago. So we have site plan approved. The home builder was fine tuning their clubhouse and playground, and the playground moved locations. So we need a site plan amendment to change that. And I think staff and the applicant, this is a good idea. It's something we should do. It's a minor amendment, but then the logistics of that to submit, get it reviewed, how long does that take?
So this becomes 8/2023-050A.
Or B or C or.
Is it always an A or B?
Starts with
It starts with an A.
In some cases, we get a whiteboard. No, it
If
starts with a zero.
If it's a minor amendment, it's still another version of the original plan.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and it can end.
That's what I thought. So I just wanted to be sure.
I mean, and just for context, Gary, we used to, for very minor things like landscape changes, those used to be field calls to where the inspector could do that, but we stopped doing that a long time ago. And everything had processed and submitted so that it was transparent for everyone. So I think for the minor amendments, though, the ones that are truly minor, it'd be nice to actually have a little bit of a more expedited process, but that's not the way it's set up in the code right now. I think internally with each team, they try to review and get those off their desk.
To that system or how that could be more efficient would be, I think that all these bullets kind of fall in that same lump.
Is there a specific recommendation to this? It's so you're saying it's 120 days in the code.
Well,
But you try to work on doing it for minor amendments to do it more quickly than that.
Yeah, right now the code does not distinguish between a new plan and an amendment in terms of the timeline. And it's 120 days for the two plan types, and then 90 days for a sketch plan.
And an admin sub.
Oh, and an admin sub, yeah. There is another comment on here, which is a little different in terms of, it's the third bullet on there, Steve. So I'm not quite sure what recommendation we have, other than, we strive to get these things reviewed quicker.
I'm sorry, which one? Are you just talking about discuss approaches to achieve the 90-day schedule? Which one are you talking about?
No, I'm sorry. I skipped down to the third bullet, clarify the planning director's discretion.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So, and this is more for just education for the group and for this type of application that comes in. In many cases, we have applications that are submitted administratively, and the way it's spelled out on our checklist is here's the information you need to submit to, for whatever you're proposing. And we can take it administratively, and we try to do that quicker. But if we get feedback, if we get any kind of opposition to the application, then we pull it off administrative, and we actually take that to the planning board. So just just to make it very clear that, if we have someone that has a problem with the application, that we're going to make sure it's public in a different sense in front of the board. I think the question and the comment is really about the discretion. So anytime we get a comment, sometimes it's not always as relevant to the application. And sometimes it's even, it's very elaborate in terms of what the concerns are. And in some cases, we resolve that issue with the applicant and whomever has their concerns. But we typically say someone has an issue, and we're going to go ahead and put it on the board's agenda. So I think it's a discretionary thing to where we take the rule that we have is the discretion is we're going to take it to the board, just so it's very clear that it's more open. I'm not sure how I'm not sure we want to change that.
Right. Well, what it says here is clarify the discretion.
And what they're saying is they want us to be able to keep those on administratively if we feel like it's not as relevant. And I think we want to say it's pretty much always relevant. We're going to take that to the board.
Like, we don't want to get into the game of determining what comment is relevant or not.
You're saying who wants to keep it administratively? The applicant? Yeah. Okay.
I think the only times we have kept things on administratively where we've received a concern is when we have an applicant that has made a change based on the concern, and we get the person who has written in for that concern to say, I'm okay with it going administratively. And then we'll keep it on that way.
Okay. So that's helpful clarity, but I am seeing the other recommendations: consider expansion of the subdivision plan process to improve efficiency, discuss ways to achieve the 90-day schedule, consider expanding what may be classified as minor amendment. Or, again, we have very little time here.
Yeah.
But are there any one of those that we can address really quickly here?
I don't know what Sharice was going to say, but otherwise I have a recommendation.
Teresa?
I was going to ask if the planning board can have a separate set of meetings for minor amendments versus all the other stuff. So maybe it's just like a quicker review process. Not question, recommendation.
I wouldn't change. The board meets every
Thursday, so I'm not sure that changes anything.
But I was just going to say, I agree. I don't think we have time to go through this. And this is all mostly planning with some, obviously would impact the agency sometimes if it goes to DRC. But I was just going to say maybe the recommendation is that planning explores, all these comments and finds ways to see if we can streamline the amendment process more.
Maybe expand upon what Christina is saying.
Explores these ideas and to determine where there are greater efficiencies or something like that, or where you can streamline.
Sure.
And a key comes back.
So sure, Ken.
No, I think that's a great start. I think I went through. There's 22 yellow stickies related to something like this in the stickies. And yet we haven't really articulated a recommendation, but I like this as a starting point that deals with those 22 process rated. So I would say, the recommendation is that planning, and I would even say, and the executive branch, because we're all in it together, embarks upon a process improvement, like a rigorous, use lean if you want to use lean process, hire, an expert in that and systematically go through the business process of reviewing and intake and all of the steps. We haven't mapped out. I know we have the big S. We haven't done any process mapping for any individual sub-step to look at how we can identify wastes, and wastes are, over processing, waiting, defects. I mean, all of these things that take time to go through and work out with the developer, how we can go through and identify those and have a scientific way where we implement a change, test it out, make sure it accomplished the goal, go back and continually improve. And I think if we do that in an incremental basis over 12 months, two years, you're going to start seeing improvements across the board. So that's the amendment I would put forth to Christina's recommendation.
I would disagree. I mean, I think that having another layer of someone that doesn't deal with our intake process, just for an example, that doesn't make sense. That adds so much more time on.
I think you're misunderstanding what my suggestion is.
I must be, because that it sounds like you want to have a whole study of our the intake process and the plan amendments so that we can.
Lean Six Sigma is you get the people that are doing the work and you bring in a consultant who can help guide them through the process of mapping out the process, tracking where all the delays are, where the wastes are. The waste could be over processing. Downtime is the acronym, by the way. O in downtime is over processing. When we take an application in and send it back and take an application in and send it back, that's a waste for all of us. It's a waste for our resources. It's a waste for the developers' resources. Defects. If we get an application in that is lacking a piece of information that is necessary to act on it, that's a defect. So that's what the D in downtime stands for. But I'm saying you bring in someone who understands Lean Six Sigma. There are things in here about dashboards on the yellow sticky that are not, reflected in our recommendations. That's like a visual workplace. That is, your dashboard gets to part of that online, but it is certainly, I think there are some dashboards that could help internally, help you understand where things are in the process, help DOT understand where things are in the process. And so my specific recommendation is you bring in a Lean Six Sigma expert to help us improve the business of government with regards to the development review process.
How is that too specific?
Wait. We just said we weren't going to do, that we weren't specific enough in the last one. So which is it?
How is that, like, how is that recommendation? It sounds to me, what I'm hearing you say when I hear it, is it sounds like you're recommending this work group, but with a Lean Six Sigma consultant in addition to Steve.
Right. I am recommending Lean Six Sigma by virtue of coming in and working on the business processes. Let's be honest. There's a political aspect to this work group. This is the Lean Six Sigma is focusing on the business of doing what is already in its business practices. It would take a lot of the politics that are going on behind the scenes in these discussions out of the equation, and we could roll up our sleeves and we could focus on getting to work and doing the job right. We for political reasons, I believe, we have not looked at the data in an honest way. That's my opinion. I mean, that, and Lean Six Sigma, you throw all the politics out, you track your submittals, you follow it through the process, and you say, okay, where's a holdup? let me implement a minor change to see, does that result in a reduction in the cycle time? And then you implement it. Did it work? Great. Did it not work? Okay, we go to another
So
solution.
if I'm understanding you, Tim, though, but you're not talking about, so there was a recommendation on the table just about how to handle these 2 or 3 things within administrative subdivision, et cetera. What I hear you saying is Lean Six Sigma consultant for the entire DR process from pre-application to shovels in the ground. That's what you're proposing, right?
Yeah.
So I think if that's gonna be a recommendation, it's got to be separate from the one that we just talked about.
I guess what I'm saying.
Because that's a huge endeavor, and this is something that seems like it could be handled internally within weeks or what have you, right, or months. I'm not, there's probably a lot of value to what you're saying, but I just think they're 2 different animals here we're talking about.
So a lot of the recommendations we're talking about saying are huge endeavors. And I think if our recommendation is that, hey, we need to invest in getting better at the business of processing these applications, because that seems to be what I'm hearing from the development work group with the comments. That seems to be, what I know from a business management approach that needs to be done. And we can eliminate, a lot of the back and forth if we get better at the process. So my specific recommendation is that we request that the county council fund a pilot of a Lean Six Sigma approach to look at something specific in the process. We could even look at intake. We have lots of testimony in there about intake. We could look at, any step of the process. And what we're going to find is that if we bring in someone who knows the tools and the techniques to apply to any kind of process that a government has to do again and again and again, we're going to be able to identify problems on a basis that does not rise to this political level, and we can get incremental improvements that are going to benefit everybody, because our staff is going to have more time.
Here's what I would propose. That may be a signal that the meeting should end. I'm not sure. But what I would propose is let's come up with the language about kind of looking at these suggestions around improving timelines. Figure out what the language is for that. Tim, what I would suggest is between now and Friday that you send to me, and any additional recommendations, I'll talk about this in a minute, sending to me, and then I'll share with our internal group to figure out how we're going to do it. So you can kind of massage the language that you've talked about. You can talk about how kind of comprehensive, or whether you're talking about some kind of initial pilot, and we'll look at what this list becomes. Fair enough?
Fair enough.
Okay. All right. So we're at 12:31. Let me just bring back. All right. So just to repeat what I said at the beginning of the meeting. So you have the 17 recommendations that I sent out yesterday at 5 o'clock. Take a look at them. See if you feel like they accurately reflect the things that we've talked about and the recommendations that make sense, and send feedback. And again, just so we have, like we talked about expectation setting here, our team doesn't have the opportunity to meet again until Monday, and our final meeting is Wednesday. So I'm not looking for a flood of copy edits from folks who are have master's degrees in English, right? But give us feedback on kind of, this isn't quite it, or you might frame it a little differently. And so that's the first thing, Friday by noon to my email address. Second is our group is going to be looking at the recommendations that came out of today, as messy as these recommendations are, and to try and put it in a sentence or two and add it to the list. And my guess is there may be 6 or 7 new ones that came out of today. And then last week I gave you kind of all of Kimberly's can we give Kimberly a round of applause for the amazing notes? All of the notes from all of our conversations. So if you want to go back and look at them, you can. All of my much poorer quality notes that I take in real time and then never touch again from all of our conversations. So if you have recommendations that you don't feel like are on the list yet, right? And we've discussed them and you feel like that we've kind of gravitated towards something that could be a recommendation, I'd like you to submit that. But again, that's got to be Friday by noon, right? And I think it's quite possible that we're looking at 30 recommendations, right? That ultimately next Wednesday that we've got to go through one by one. You know, do we get 67% or do we not get 67%? And there's not going to be, there may be a couple minutes of discussion to clarify something, but especially with new stuff, we can't be revising and wordsmithing while we're voting, right? So it's like, we're going to have to deal with the list we've got and try and deal with, go through every single one of them in 4 hours. Amanda.
So at the break, I learned something that I didn't know, which was very helpful. So we have this list of recommendations. We have this document that we've all been working off of, but there's another spreadsheet. This is tab A and there's tab B. And I didn't even personally realize there was a tab B of this with some of the testimony and recommendations that were put in a separate category for, internal review, or maybe you can explain it better, but I just wanted to flag that for the public who's watching, because folks may look at this and say, well, some things that I raised are not reflected at all in here. Well, it turns out there's tab B, again, which now I learned about, and that does have the documentation of that. And I just want to make sure tab B doesn't get lost.
Right. So I mentioned it at an earlier meeting, probably a couple weeks ago, but I say a lot of things and not everyone remembers everything I say. But yeah, it's an important reminder. There were 120 plus comments that Pam and Levu primarily, but also our whole internal group took a look at and said, important issue, not development review related. We compiled a separate list of all those and tried to we haven't categorized them yet, but we've identified which agency, or if it's an interagency group, that will need to address that post this work group. And that will be a part of the official record. It will be part of the official report as an attachment or appendix, right? Just like tab A will be. So I'm glad you brought that up, because it's worth saying it to the public. It's worth reminding this group. Those didn't disappear, but again, there was just the data we got was voluminous, and we tried to find a home for everything. And we still, as we know, we haven't gotten to 10 of the categories that were development review related. So imperfect process, but important reminder. And yeah, it will be part of the final report. And I will reorganize it around, like if there are 6 things related to DEP, right? That'll be a category in tab B. Right now, it's not organized that way. It's just kind of a laundry list. So by agency or interagency.
But we were thinking of dividing it by agency as
Just
well.
so it'd be
agencies
easier.
Can say, DEP can say, here's our
Mentioned it
list.
a few weeks ago.
That
We
makes sense.
did mention to the group to take a look at it in case there was something on there that you thought needed to get moved over to the other tab. And so, one of us will try to do it, and then one of the two of us always takes a double check. And I have definitely moved things from B to A to just try to make sure that we aren't missing something that one of us might not think is development review, but think, well, it's a lot like other comments in development review. And so we really should just include it there so that we're not missing it as another comment.
So it's past 12:30. So our group is meeting Monday at 3 o'clock for, I don't want to really say this, for however long it takes, to finalize the list of, your feedback on the 17, the additional ones that came out of today, and subsequent ones that you will or may submit between now and Friday. And, I guess the last thing I would say is for additional submissions, I just strongly encourage, make sure that we've talked about it. So this is not pulling something from some category we never got to, unfortunately. It's that we've talked about it, and the way we talked about it seemed like there was a clear enough idea of where the group landed on it, and therefore you want to submit it as a recommendation. 12 o'clock, door closes in my email, and then I'm going to compile them and circulate it to our group, so on Monday we can figure out kind of what list we're looking at. And by Tuesday noon, hopefully earlier, we will circulate the new revised expanded list of recommendations that have kind of come through the door between now and Friday. Imperfect process, but you know, given the time constraints, I think the best we can do. So do what you can to work with our timelines, and let's see where we end up next Wednesday. But again, the idea Wednesday, however many it is, 22, 27, 33 recommendations. We're going to go through them one by one. I'll be leading that process. The delegate actually told me that she'll be here, but here virtually. And if we have 30, that means, you know, we got
30 seconds each.
We got about 6 or 7 minutes to conduct the vote for each one, right? So there may be
a timer app on the
right.
big
I
screen
do
there?
need that. I need to explore where that timer
only
is.
half joking.
So, yeah, just like the countdown clock at the public hearings. So, yeah, I'll look into that. Maybe that'll work too. So anyway, I know sometimes it's a frustrating process. I'm doing the best I can. We're doing the best we can. We have a lot of really smart people around the table, a lot of great conversations. We're wrestling with complex stuff. I think, you know, I can tell you the delegate was not expecting for this group to be weighing 20, 25, 30 recommendations. She was just hoping, can we get a handful from state, handful for county? So we're exceeding her expectations.
Careful what you ask for.
Right. All right. But thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day. See you next week. Thank you all.